It was supposed to be just another technology competition, a showcase of the brightest minds in the world. Silicon Valley was buzzing with excitement as innovators from across the globe gathered to present their groundbreaking ideas. But no one expected what was about to unfold. Among the sea of professionals, tech giants, and well-established engineers, one name stood out: Ben Parker. At just 9 years old, Ben was a prodigy, an extraordinary child with the mind of a seasoned inventor. His reputation had grown quickly, not through fame or fortune, but through the whispers of astonished adults who had seen his work firsthand. The kid had created software that could predict natural disasters, built robots that could learn, and even had a project in development that could revolutionize clean energy. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. But Ben wasn't here to show off. He didn't care about fame. He wasn't interested in applause. He just wanted to solve problems. The moment Ben entered the competition hall, he caught the eye of many people, but none more than Elon Musk. The billionaire tech mogul, founder of Tesla and SpaceX, was the very person Ben had looked up to for years. Musk's relentless drive to innovate, to push the boundaries of what was possible, inspired Ben more than anyone. But now, there was something strange about this meeting. Ben wasn't the starstruck child he once was. Instead, he was the one with a solution that could change the world. And Musk, well, he was just another competitor. "What's the story with the kid?" someone whispered as they watched Ben walk past. Musk, overhearing the comment, raised an eyebrow. "His name's Ben Parker," a voice beside him explained. 9 years old. "You'll see. He's different." Musk was intrigued. After all, he had met many brilliant minds in his time, but the idea of a 9-year-old prodigy competing in the same arena was something new. As he turned back to look at Ben, the kid was already setting up a makeshift workstation, his small fingers flying over a laptop, typing away as if this were just another day at the office. What happens when two minds, one of the greatest inventors of our time and a young prodigy, collide? Musk asked aloud, half to himself, half to the crowd. "It's about to get interesting." The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone was waiting for the moment when Ben would reveal his innovation. But then something unexpected happened, something no one could have predicted. Ben turned to face the crowd, his small but confident voice cutting through the silence. "I have a proposal," Ben announced. His words weren't boastful or arrogant. They were simply matter of fact. He stepped forward, setting down his laptop and pulling out a small, intricate device. It looked like something from the future, a combination of advanced sensors and tiny solar panels. "I call this the Energizer," Ben continued. "It's a device that harnesses the power of the sun, wind, and motion, all in one compact unit. It can generate sustainable energy anywhere, anytime. Imagine the possibilities." Musk, intrigued but not easily impressed, took a step forward. "This is bold," he said, his voice both curious and challenging. "But a 9-year-old presenting this in front of me? You've got some guts, kid." Ben didn't flinch. He was used to people doubting him, used to being underestimated. But today, he wasn't just going to present an idea. He was going to prove that age was just a number when it came to innovation. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Ben said, his eyes sparkling with determination. "This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" The crowd's murmurs grew louder, some skeptical, some amazed. As the competition officially kicked off, the stage was set for a battle of intellect, creativity, and sheer will. And so, the first chapter of this unexpected rivalry began. One that would challenge everything the world thought it knew about genius, ambition, and the future of technology. But the question remained: what would happen when the world's most influential inventor faced off against a 9-year-old prodigy? Only time would tell. But Musk couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. And for Ben Parker, the journey had just begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Ben sat at his desk, gazing out the window at the sprawling skyline of Silicon Valley. Despite his fame as a child prodigy, he didn't feel like he belonged here. At least not yet. His mind wasn't preoccupied with the event that had just unfolded. It was focused on something much bigger, a world-changing idea that had been brewing in his mind for years. But for now, this competition was more than just a stepping stone. It was a test, a proving ground. For someone so young, Ben had faced his fair share of struggles. It hadn't been easy growing up. He wasn't born into wealth or privilege, but into a modest family with big dreams. His mother, Claire Parker, a former scientist, had been his greatest influence. She had raised him on a steady diet of curiosity, books, and hands-on experimentation. She taught him that nothing was impossible, as long as you were willing to ask the right questions. From a young age, Ben had shown an uncanny ability to understand complex concepts. When he was only 5, he built his first robot, just a small, clunky thing that could move in a straight line and turn in circles. But that little robot, built from scraps of plastic and old electronics, sparked something in Ben, a desire to understand, to create, and most importantly, to change the world. As he grew older, his projects became more advanced. By age 7, Ben had created software capable of predicting the next major storm. By 8, he had invented a system that could detect and repair electrical faults in household appliances. Each time he finished a project, Claire would smile proudly, but always remind him, "This is just the beginning, Ben. There's so much more to do." For the longest time, Ben had been working in the shadows of the tech world. People talked about him, yes. They marveled at his inventions, shared stories of his genius. But no one really saw him. They saw a child. A prodigy, sure, but a kid nonetheless. They underestimated him, often assuming that his creations were somehow dumbed down by his age. He hadn't yet had the chance to prove them wrong, until now. That was why he was here today, standing in the same room as one of the most influential people on the planet. Elon Musk? Musk, the man who had transformed the world of electric cars, the man who dreamed of colonizing Mars, and the man who had set the world standard for innovation. To Ben, Musk was a god of technology, a titan of industry. But Ben wasn't in awe. No, he was determined. This wasn't about being starstruck. It was about showing the world that his age didn't define his abilities, that anyone, regardless of how young or old, could change the course of history. Back home, Claire had given him one last piece of advice before he left for the competition. "Remember, Ben, it's not about being the smartest in the room. It's about knowing how to use your knowledge to make a difference. Never forget that." As Ben's thoughts returned to the present, the crowd around him was buzzing with excitement, but he barely noticed. He wasn't there to impress anyone with flashy words or grandiose speeches. He was there to demonstrate the Energizer, his latest creation, a device that could change the world's energy landscape forever. If he could just show people what it could do, they might start taking him seriously. Claire's words echoed in his mind. It's about making a difference. Ben's heart raced as he approached the stage for his first official demonstration. It was his moment. He'd worked so hard for this, and now the world was watching. On the other side of the room, Elon Musk was surrounded by his team, but his eyes were fixed on Ben. He couldn't help but admire the audacity of the boy. At his age, he had been obsessed with video games and the occasional rocket model, not solving the energy crisis. But Musk knew better than anyone that age had nothing to do with the true potential of a mind. "What do you think of the kid?" one of Musk's colleagues asked. "I think he's a lot more than just a kid," Musk replied, his voice quiet but thoughtful. "I've seen a lot of young geniuses in my time, but this one, he's different. He might just have what it takes to change everything." The comment surprised the colleague, but Musk wasn't one to be easily impressed. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something uniquely special about Ben. Back on the stage, Ben connected his Energizer to a nearby display monitor, and with a flick of his wrist, the device hummed to life. The room fell silent as the machine began generating energy from a combination of solar power, wind, and motion. The crowd watched in awe as the device's digital screen displayed a constant flow of clean, renewable energy, produced not by fossil fuels, not by anything that could harm the environment, but by nature itself. It was a breakthrough. Ben didn't speak as the audience absorbed what they were seeing. He didn't need to. The machine spoke for itself. The technology was simple, elegant, and revolutionary. When the demonstration ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Finally, someone spoke. "How much does it cost to produce one of these?" Ben smiled, his confidence shining through. "The beauty of it is that it doesn't cost much at all. This technology can be scaled down to fit in homes, schools, and even remote villages. It's simple to produce and maintain, and the best part is, it's sustainable." Musk watched the display, his mind already racing with possibilities. If what Ben had created was real, and he had no reason to doubt it, it could change everything. It could make the dream of a clean, sustainable energy future a reality for people everywhere. But this wasn't just about the technology. This was about Ben. This 9-year-old had shown the kind of vision and understanding that many grown adults never reached, and Musk knew it. He had to get to know this kid. And that's when the challenge began. The hum of conversation filled the competition hall as Ben stepped down from the stage. His demonstration had stunned the room. But now, the aftermath was just beginning. People crowded around the display, murmuring to each other, speculating about the implications of his invention. Some were impressed, others skeptical. Ben didn't notice. He was too focused on the next step. The adrenaline was still rushing through his veins, but there was no time to celebrate. This was just the beginning. Elon Musk, standing off to the side, was deep in conversation with his team. His face was inscrutable, but his eyes were fixed on Ben, who was now talking to a group of journalists. Musk wasn't the kind of man who got excited easily. He had seen countless inventions come and go. But this felt different. It wasn't just the invention itself, it was the vision, the way he had described it, the way he understood the problems that energy and sustainability presented, even at his young age. There was an urgency in Ben's words that Musk recognized. It was the same fire Musk had when he started Tesla and SpaceX. The desire to solve a problem, to change the world. But Musk wasn't sure yet. There was a part of him that wondered if this was just the clever work of an incredibly gifted child, or if Ben was truly onto something revolutionary. Musk wasn't known for giving out praise easily. He would have to test Ben, push him, see if the boy could handle the pressure of being at the cutting edge of innovation. Elon stepped forward. He walked toward Ben, who was still surrounded by reporters. The moment Ben spotted Musk, his face lit up with recognition. Musk was a hero to him, but he didn't let it show. He remained calm, composed, focused. "Ben Parker," Musk said, his voice firm but respectful. "Impressive work. How old are you again?" 9, Ben replied simply. "But that doesn't matter. Age is just a number." Musk chuckled. "I like that attitude. You're right. Age doesn't matter when you're solving problems that the rest of us are struggling with." Ben looked Musk in the eye. "I didn't come here to impress anyone, Mr. Musk. I came here because I think I can make a difference." Musk's eyes narrowed. There was something about Ben's confidence that made Musk feel both challenged and intrigued. "You're bold," Musk said. "I like that. But boldness alone won't change the world. Are you ready for what comes next?" Ben raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Musk leaned in slightly. "I don't just want to know if your invention works. I want to know if you can take it further. I want to see if you have the guts to challenge everything you think you know. Because to make a real impact, you have to be willing to risk everything. Can you handle that?" Ben's gaze was unwavering. The challenge was on, and Ben wasn't backing down. "I'm ready." Musk smiled. "Good. Let's see if you can back that up." The competition organizers soon announced a new twist, a live demonstration for all the finalists. This wasn't going to be like any ordinary competition. The judges wanted to see who could push their technology to the limit, who could adapt in real time, and who could innovate when the stakes were at their highest. Ben's heart raced, but not from fear. It was excitement. This was exactly what he had wanted. A chance to prove that his invention could change the world, under the pressure of real-world conditions. The following day, Ben stood in front of a much larger audience. The room was filled with industry leaders, engineers, investors, and the press. Musk sat in the front row, watching closely. Ben could feel his eyes on him, but he didn't let it distract him. Instead, he focused on the machine. The Energizer was about to be tested in ways it hadn't been before. Ben activated the device, but this time, there was a catch. The competition organizers had set up a series of random, unpredictable environmental challenges to simulate real-world conditions: high winds, fluctuating sunlight, and even sudden mechanical failures. Ben had to prove that his system could adapt, self-correct, and continue functioning in these unpredictable situations. As the challenges began, Ben's face remained calm. He watched as the Energizer responded, adjusting itself to the changes in the environment. The solar panels adjusted their angles, the wind turbines shifted to catch the best gusts, and the motion sensors continued generating energy even when the device was in motion. But then, the first major obstacle hit. The wind turbines malfunctioned due to a sudden spike in wind speed. A small piece of the equipment snapped off. The crowd gasped. There were murmurs. Was this the end of the Energizer? Ben didn't panic. He swiftly opened the device's interface on his tablet and began typing commands. Within seconds, the device made an automatic recalibration. The broken turbine was bypassed, and the system switched to alternative energy sources. It was a near-perfect recovery. The crowd erupted in applause. Elon Musk, who had been watching intently, leaned back in his seat. He was impressed. Ben had solved the problem before it became a crisis. Not only had he designed the system, but he had the foresight to make it adaptable, scalable, and resilient under pressure. The test was far from over, but Ben had already proven something. He wasn't just a child prodigy. He was a true inventor, someone who could adapt, learn, and grow under pressure. As the final environmental tests came to a close, the judges were speechless. Ben had not only passed the test, but he had also rewritten the rules of what was possible. As the crowd slowly quieted down after Ben's flawless performance, the atmosphere in the room was electric. Everyone was buzzing, not just about the technology, but about Ben Parker. The 9-year-old had done something few adults in the industry could. He had taken the chaos of real-world problems and turned them into an opportunity, all while remaining calm and focused. It was clear now that he was a force to be reckoned with. Elon Musk, still seated in the front row, was no longer just a passive observer. He stood up, his mind racing with possibilities. The crowd parted slightly as he made his way toward the stage, his footsteps confident, deliberate. Ben noticed Musk's approach but didn't flinch. This wasn't a moment for hero worship. It was business. It was about proving that his creation could withstand not only the trials of today, but those of tomorrow. Musk reached the stage and turned to face Ben, a small smile playing on his lips. "Congratulations, Ben," Musk said, his voice carrying across the now silent hall. "You've impressed everyone here, but I have a challenge for you." The crowd grew still, waiting for the words that would follow. Ben looked up, his expression unreadable. "What kind of challenge?" Musk's smile grew. "I want to see how far your Energizer can go. You've shown that it works in controlled environments, but I want to see if it can perform under extreme conditions. Real-world, unpredictable scenarios. Can it withstand space-level conditions?" Ben didn't hesitate. "I'm ready." Musk raised an eyebrow. "You're sure? Because this won't be like anything you've ever encountered before. I'm talking about testing it in outer space." The words hung in the air like a challenge that demanded an answer. There was an electric tension in the room, a feeling that this was more than just a competition. This was a turning point, a chance for Ben to prove that his innovation wasn't just a fluke. It was the future. Ben didn't flinch. Instead, he stared back at Musk, his expression unwavering. "If you think it'll make a difference, then yes, I'm ready." Musk nodded, impressed. The kid was serious. "It's not just about energy generation in space," Musk said. "It's about adapting to the harshest of conditions. Extreme radiation, temperature shifts, zero gravity. I've seen engineers with decades of experience fail in space. So, my question to you is, do you think you're up for it?" Ben's heart was racing. Space? The very idea of it sent a thrill through him. He had read books about space missions, watched documentaries about Mars, and dreamed of one day working with pioneers like Elon Musk. And now, here he was, standing face to face with the man who had made those dreams seem like reality. He looked up at Musk, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "You want to see how the Energizer works in space? I'm game. Let's do it." Musk smiled, clearly liking the kid's determination. "All right, we'll arrange a small-scale test. You'll be part of a team that will send a prototype version of the Energizer into space aboard one of SpaceX's Falcon rockets. It'll be a test of its durability, its adaptability, and its potential for future missions. If it passes, the possibilities are endless. The room erupted into applause. The stakes had just gone from national to cosmic. But Ben wasn't focused on the applause. He was focused on the challenge. The idea of sending his creation into space, testing it under the harshest conditions imaginable. It felt like the perfect opportunity to prove not just his ability, but the true power of his invention. Ben turned to his mother, Claire, who was sitting in the audience. She gave him a quiet, encouraging smile, and in that moment, he knew he had her full support. But beyond that, he felt a deep responsibility. The Energizer wasn't just his project anymore. It had become a symbol of everything he wanted to achieve. A beacon of hope for a more sustainable future. Musk was watching Ben carefully, waiting for him to speak. Ben finally broke the silence. "You really think this will work?" Ben asked. Musk's smile softened, as if acknowledging the significance of the moment. "I think it can, but I'm more interested in what you think, Ben. This is your creation. What do you see?" Ben didn't need to think for long. He had always envisioned a future where the world no longer relied on finite resources, where energy could be drawn from nature itself, clean and abundant. The Energizer was just the beginning. But in space, the possibilities were beyond what he could even imagine. "I see a future where energy isn't a problem," Ben said confidently. "I see a world where every home, every school, every hospital, every business is powered by sustainable energy. No more oil, no more coal, just clean energy from the earth, the wind, the sun, and even space." Musk's eyes widened slightly. For the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of inspiration. It wasn't just about technology. It was about vision. And Ben, at 9 years old, had vision in spades. "You're right," Musk said. "This could change everything. You could change everything." In the following weeks, preparations for the Energizer space mission went into full swing. Musk's team at SpaceX began working closely with Ben to modify the Energizer for space conditions. The device would have to be compact, durable, and able to withstand the extremes of outer space. Ben's life became a blur of meetings, experiments, and late nights in the lab. But there was something else that kept him grounded through it all: his desire to make a difference. He wasn't just doing this for recognition. He was doing it because he knew the world needed it. Meanwhile, the press coverage grew more intense. News outlets from around the world began covering the story of the 9-year-old prodigy who was about to send his invention into space. People were fascinated by Ben's drive, his brilliance, and his unwavering determination. But Ben knew the real work was just beginning. If the Energizer worked in space, it could revolutionize energy on Earth. But if it failed, the dream might be over. And so, as the countdown to the Falcon rocket launch drew near, Ben's excitement mingled with the pressure of knowing just how high the stakes were. Would the Energizer survive the harsh conditions of space? Could Ben's vision truly change the world? The answers were coming soon, and Ben was ready. The days leading up to the Falcon rocket launch felt like a blur for Ben. Every waking moment was consumed with final checks, last-minute adjustments, and the unrelenting pressure of knowing that the fate of his invention, his future, was hanging in the balance. Ben didn't mind the pressure. He thrived under it. But there were moments, late at night, when the weight of the task ahead felt almost too heavy to bear. He sat alone in his room, the soft hum of his laptop the only sound. His eyes were fixed on the digital countdown for the SpaceX mission, ticking down the days until the rocket would launch into space with the Energizer on board. The room was lit only by the glow of his screen, where the mission timeline played out in neat rows of text. 1 week to go. 4 days to go. 3, 2, 1. Ben exhaled deeply, trying to shake off the feeling of anticipation that had been building in his chest. Every step of the journey had led to this. The hours of work, the sleepless nights, the discussions with Musk and the SpaceX engineers. But none of it mattered if the Energizer didn't perform in space. He clicked through the final mission details once more. The Energizer would be placed in a special capsule designed to withstand the extreme temperatures of space, with a series of sensors to measure its performance. Once in orbit, The capsule would deploy the device, and the Energizer would begin its operation. Ben knew that in space, conditions were unpredictable. One glitch, one malfunction, and the mission would fail. The slightest issue could render the Energizer useless. But he wasn't worried about failure. He had built the system to adapt, to heal itself when things went wrong. The real challenge would be how the system responded to space's hostile environment. If it could handle zero gravity, radiation, and extreme temperature fluctuations, it could work anywhere. It was this thought that drove him forward. The idea that his creation could make energy accessible to everyone, everywhere. Clean, renewable energy that didn't harm the environment or rely on finite resources. The Energizer could be the answer to the world's energy crisis. The thought made his heart race. And yet, there was one question that lingered, even as the countdown drew closer. Was he really ready for what would come next? The day of the launch arrived, and the tension was palpable. SpaceX's Cape Canaveral launch site was a hive of activity. Engineers and technicians moved with practiced precision, conducting final checks on the rocket and its payload. Thousands of spectators, journalists, and live cameras were set up around the base, broadcasting the event to a global audience. Ben stood off to the side, his hands in his pockets, watching as the final preparations unfolded. His mother, Claire, stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, offering quiet words of encouragement. "You've done everything you can, Ben," Claire said softly. "Now, it's time to let the Energizer do its thing." Ben nodded. He didn't need to hear the reassurance. He'd been ready for this moment since the day he created the Energizer. But he also knew this wasn't just about him. This was about something much bigger. A chance to change the world. As the countdown clock ticked down, Musk appeared beside them, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a rare expression of excitement. "You've built something extraordinary, Ben," Musk said, shaking Ben's hand firmly. "No matter what happens today, you've already changed the conversation, and I'm proud to be a part of it." Ben smiled back, trying to suppress the nervousness bubbling up inside him. The Energizer was about to be sent into space. It was one thing to talk about possibilities, to dream about the future. It was another thing entirely to see it take flight. With a sudden rush of noise and motion, the Falcon rocket ignited, its engines roaring to life. The sky seemed to split open as the massive rocket shot upward, leaving behind a trail of smoke and fire. Ben's heart raced as he watched it climb higher and higher into the sky, the tension in his chest slowly dissolving with every passing second. The rocket disappeared from view, leaving only the faintest wisp of smoke in the sky. The Energizer was on its way to space. Hours passed, and Ben's focus never wavered. His eyes were fixed on the screens in front of him, where the mission team was receiving data from the rocket's journey. They were tracking the rocket's position as it reached orbit and began its deployment phase. The tension was unbearable. Then came the signal, the moment of truth. The Energizer had been successfully deployed into space. The capsule containing the device separated from the rocket, its small solar panels beginning to unfold, soaking in the light of the distant sun. The sensors began transmitting data back to Earth. Ben watched as the numbers on the screen updated in real time. The Energizer was performing flawlessly. Temperature? Normal. Radiation levels? Within acceptable range. Energy output? Stable. Ben let out a quiet breath. But then, just as the team began to relax, a small alarm sounded. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. One of the sensors had begun fluctuating erratically. Ben leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Check the solar panel array," one of the engineers said, typing furiously at the keyboard. Another moment of silence passed, and then the data was updated again. The Energizer's solar panels were experiencing an issue. Something was interfering with their ability to collect energy from the sun. The Energizer was designed to adapt, but this was something the team hadn't anticipated. This was the unknown, the part of space exploration that always threw even the most well-prepared off track. Ben swallowed hard, his mind working quickly. The sensors showed that the solar array was facing away from the sun due to an unexpected shift in the satellite's orientation. He had to act fast. He typed out a command, adjusting the angle of the solar panels remotely. Within seconds, the Energizer systems adjusted, correcting the misalignment. Data began to pour in again. Energy levels were rising steadily. Ben's heart pounded. The Energizer had just passed its first real test in space. The team erupted in applause. But Ben, ever the perfectionist, simply nodded. It wasn't over yet. The Energizer still had to survive the next 24 hours of exposure to space's harsh conditions. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Energizer had worked in space. Elon Musk, who had been watching from the sidelines, approached Ben with a wide grin on his face. "You did it," Musk said, clapping Ben on the back. "This isn't just a success for you, Ben. This is a success for the future. For all of us." Ben smiled back, but his thoughts were already moving ahead. This was only the beginning. The Energizer had passed the first test, but there were many more challenges ahead, on Earth, in space, and beyond. He turned to Musk, his voice steady but determined. "Let's make this happen," Ben said. "Let's change the world." The days following the Energizer's successful space mission were nothing short of a whirlwind. The world had watched in awe as a 9-year-old inventor sent his creation into space, overcoming every obstacle with the kind of poise and skill that even seasoned engineers could only dream of. News outlets scrambled to cover the story, and Ben's face appeared on the cover of magazines, alongside headlines that read, "The Prodigy Who Will Change the World and SpaceX's Youngest Innovator, The Future of Energy." His inbox overflowed with messages from investors, scientists, and companies eager to collaborate. But amid all the attention and excitement, there was one thought that kept Ben grounded. This was only the beginning. Back at SpaceX's headquarters, the team was still poring over the data collected during the mission. The Energizer had passed its initial test in space with flying colors, but now came the real challenge. The device had to prove that it could work on Earth in extreme conditions, where the variability of weather, terrain, and human error presented their own set of hurdles. The Energizer wasn't just a space-age gadget. It was meant to be a solution for communities around the world. Ben sat in a meeting room, surrounded by engineers and technicians. He hadn't yet fully realized the scope of what he'd accomplished, but he could feel the weight of it now. Musk sat across from him, as usual, cool and calculating. But today, there was a look in his eyes that Ben couldn't quite place. It wasn't the usual curiosity or challenge. It was something deeper, something almost anticipatory. "We've got a lot of data from the mission," Musk said, breaking the silence. "But now we need to test the Energizer in ways no one's ever thought of before. And we're going to need you to be part of it, Ben." Ben straightened up, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Musk paused, letting the gravity of his words settle in the room. "We're talking about real-world deployments. Not just testing in a controlled environment, but actually taking the Energizer into extreme conditions. Conditions that push it to the limits. And I want you to lead these tests." Ben's heart skipped a beat. Lead the tests? For a moment, the thought seemed almost too big to comprehend. He had already created the Energizer, but leading the tests? Going out into the field and taking on challenges no one had ever dared? That was a different level entirely. "But why me?" Ben asked, his voice steady but curious. "Why not the engineers? They know more about the systems and how to fix things if something goes wrong." Ben felt a swell of pride, but it was quickly followed by the weight of responsibility. The Energizer wasn't just an invention anymore. It was a movement, and if something went wrong in the field, if it failed in the real world, the consequences wouldn't just affect him. They would affect everyone who believed in the potential of his invention. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the SpaceX engineers, who were all waiting for his response. They didn't expect him to hesitate. They wanted him to take the reins. But Ben wasn't sure if he was ready to shoulder that responsibility. Still, deep inside, he knew the answer. "I'm in," he said, his voice unwavering. A week later, Ben found himself standing on the edge of a vast, barren desert in Southern California, where the Energizer would undergo its first major field test. The desert, with its extreme temperature fluctuations, harsh winds, and intense sunlight, was the perfect environment to see if the Energizer could withstand nature's unpredictability. The dry heat burned against his skin as Ben surveyed the landscape. He wasn't alone. A team of engineers stood beside him, watching as workers unloaded the Energizer from the truck and set it up for its test. Claire was there too, quietly observing from the sidelines, though Ben could sense the mixture of pride and anxiety in her eyes. Ben took a deep breath. He had worked on the Energizer for years, but this was different. This wasn't just about proving it worked in controlled conditions. This was about survival. As the team finished setting up the device, Ben noticed that the desert sun was already beginning to set, casting long shadows across the dry earth. He checked the Energizer's control panel on his tablet. The device was designed to draw energy from solar panels, wind turbines, and even the vibrations of the ground beneath it. But that didn't guarantee it would work perfectly in a harsh environment like this. The first challenge came quickly. As the sun sank lower in the sky, the temperature plummeted. The Energizer systems were designed to handle temperature fluctuations, but Ben could see the energy efficiency monitor start to dip as the cold set in. "Adjust the insulation," one of the engineers called out, but Ben was already ahead of them. He tapped a few commands into the tablet and watched as the Energizer's exterior panel shifted, increasing the insulation to retain heat. Within moments, the device stabilized, and the energy output returned to normal. The first test was a success, but it was just the beginning. As night fell, the temperature would drop even further, and the next challenge would be the wind. Ben's heart raced as the desert winds began to pick up, howling across the barren landscape. The Energizer's wind turbines were designed to adjust to changing wind speeds, but Ben knew that the intensity of the desert winds could easily overwhelm the system. He watched intently as the turbines began to spin faster, the blades cutting through the air. For a moment, everything seemed perfect. Then the wind picked up. It wasn't just a gust, it was a full-blown desert storm. The wind tore across the desert with a ferocity that made the engineers scramble. The Energizer's turbines started to slow as the gusts became too intense. Ben's fingers flew across the tablet, trying to adjust the system's wind speed limiter. Come on, come on. The turbines ground to a halt. Ben cursed under his breath. This was bad. The Energizer was designed to be adaptable, but this was the first time the system was facing such an extreme condition. "I'm going to rear out power from the solar cells," Ben said quickly, directing the system to draw more energy from the solar panels. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was all he could do. As the wind howled louder, the Energizer began to hum again, slowly recovering its energy output. The storm eventually passed, leaving a haunting silence in its wake. The Energizer had survived. But Ben knew this was just one test, and the hardest challenges were yet to come. After the success in the desert, the team quickly moved to the next stage of testing, a dense, humid jungle environment in South America. If the Energizer could survive the sweltering heat and the heavy rainfall of the jungle, it could handle almost anything. But this time, Ben wasn't just worried about the weather. There were other variables at play here: wildlife, the risk of the system being damaged, the unpredictability of the jungle itself. As the team ventured deeper into the jungle with the Energizer in tow, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to enter uncharted territory. And in this place, there would be no turning back. The dense jungle of South America was unlike anything Ben had ever encountered. The air was thick with moisture, and the ground was soft beneath his boots, making every step feel as though he were walking through a sponge. Insects buzzed incessantly, and the distant sounds of animals filled the air, adding an eerie soundtrack to their journey. Ben felt the weight of the Energizer strapped securely to the back of the transport vehicle. This was no longer just a test in a controlled environment. Out here, in the heart of the jungle, the device would face an entirely new set of challenges: extreme humidity, unpredictable rainfall, and the constant threat of physical damage from the elements. The engineers who accompanied Ben were nervous. This environment was treacherous, and no one was sure how the Energizer would respond. The solar panels that had worked so flawlessly in the desert might struggle under the thick canopy of trees. The wind turbines, too, might have a hard time harnessing the limited airflow between the jungle's dense foliage. But Ben was undeterred. If the Energizer could thrive here, it could thrive anywhere. The team arrived at the site, a small clearing near a riverbank, and began unloading the Energizer. The sun was high in the sky, but the thick trees overhead created a constant patchwork of shadows and light. Ben studied the area carefully. The Energizer needed to be placed where it could capture as much sunlight as possible while being protected from the constant downpour that seemed to be just around the corner. I'll set up the solar array over here, Ben directed one of the engineers, pointing to a small area with a break in the trees. And let's try to elevate the wind turbines just enough to catch any breeze. They worked quickly, securing the devices to sturdy poles and placing them in strategic locations. The jungle was constantly shifting. Branches swayed in the wind, and vines crept up around the devices. But Ben remained focused. He knew the team needed this test to succeed, not just for the Energizer, but for the world watching him. As the final touches were put on the setup, the sky began to darken. The first drops of rain began to fall. Ben checked the device's sensors and was pleased to see the Energizer's solar cells adjusting automatically to compensate for the reduced light. "We're ready," Ben said, his voice steady. "Let's see if it works." The first challenge came quickly. Within minutes of powering up, the rain started falling in earnest. The thick jungle canopy did little to protect the equipment, and the Energizer's sensors began to register the spike in humidity. At first, the Energizer performed well. The solar panels adjusted to the reduced sunlight, shifting to maximize the limited light filtering through the trees. The wind turbines started spinning, catching the gusts of wind that threaded through the jungle. But then the rain intensified. The steady downpour turned into a torrential storm, and the humidity reached unbearable levels. The Energizer's temperature regulation system kicked in, but Ben could see the energy output beginning to dip. The Energizer wasn't designed for this level of moisture, and the system was struggling to maintain balance. "Adjust the drainage," one of the engineers shouted. They'd anticipated the risk of flooding, but not the intensity of the storm. The water was pooling around the base of the Energizer, threatening to short-circuit the system. Ben, though, remained calm. He could feel the pressure, but he wasn't going to let it overwhelm him. "Bring up the energy shields," Ben ordered, his fingers dancing over the tablet screen. The Energizer had been designed with an emergency energy shield that could temporarily protect the system from damage in extreme conditions. With the software, the energy shields deployed, creating a protective barrier around the Energizer. The rain continued to pour down, but the device was now shielded from the worst of it. Slowly, the energy output began to stabilize. Ben watched the data feed with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The Energizer had weathered the storm, at least for now. The rain continued for hours, and the team worked around the clock to ensure the device was properly insulated and functioning as best it could. As the storm began to subside, a sense of quiet relief washed over the team. The Energizer had managed to hold up in the most challenging of conditions. The solar cells had continued to adjust, pulling in as much energy as possible despite the canopy blocking much of the light. The wind turbines, although not as efficient as they would have been in an open field, had still contributed a steady flow of energy. Ben stood over the device, staring at the data with a small smile creeping onto his face. The Energizer had survived its first major test. And not just survived, it had adapted. "We did it," Ben said, turning to the team. His voice was filled with pride, but there was a hint of exhaustion as well. Claire, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "You did it, Ben," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've really done it." But Ben wasn't ready to celebrate just yet. There were still many more hurdles ahead. As the rain cleared and the sun began to set, Ben knew the real test was still to come. As night fell, the humidity remained high, and the jungle's natural dangers began to emerge. The team set up camp nearby, keeping an eye on the Energizer from a distance. Ben remained with the engineers, watching over the device. His mind was constantly working, analyzing data, considering what could go wrong next. Around midnight, the jungle seemed to come alive. The sounds of nocturnal animals, howler monkeys, frogs, and insects, created a cacophony of noise. But something felt off. Ben couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He was about to check the Energizer's output again when one of the engineers shouted, "There's something wrong with the turbines," he yelled. Ben bolted upright, his heart racing. He rushed to the control panel and checked the feed. The wind turbines had stopped completely. Worse, the entire system seemed to be malfunctioning. "It's the animals," one of the engineers muttered. "Something must have gotten to the turbines." Ben's blood ran cold. He'd anticipated mechanical failures, environmental challenges, and even system malfunctions, but he had never considered the wildlife of the jungle as a serious threat. The wind turbines were exposed, and as it turned out, a group of large birds had flown into them during the night, damaging the blades. The Energizer was offline, and the jungle, ever hostile, had found a new way to test Ben's creation. "Get the drones ready," Ben said, his voice calm but determined. "We're not leaving here without the Energizer functioning. We'll need to find a way to fix it before we can continue testing." It was a hard lesson for Ben, but one that he knew would make him stronger. The jungle wasn't just a place for the Energizer to prove its worth. It was also a place for Ben to prove his own. Every failure, every unexpected challenge, was an opportunity to learn. As the team rallied to make repairs, Ben realized something. This wasn't just about proving that the Energizer could work in any condition. It was about adaptability, not just of the machine, but of himself. Every obstacle, every malfunction, was a test of his ability to lead, to think quickly, and to overcome adversity. The Energizer had proven itself once again. It could withstand the jungle. Now, Ben would prove that he could too. The next few days in the jungle were filled with constant repairs and tests. Each time the team thought they had mastered one challenge, another seemed to appear out of nowhere. The jungle was relentless. The damage to the Energizer's wind turbines had been repaired quickly, thanks to the portable drone tech that had been brought in to assist. However, new issues arose as quickly as the last ones had been solved. The humidity continued to play havoc with the solar panels, forcing Ben and his team to come up with inventive ways to keep the energy production stable. The system was designed to be self-adjusting, but the jungle's conditions were far beyond anything they had predicted. The constant downpours weren't helping. One morning, Ben awoke to find that the rainwater had seeped into several critical components of the system, short-circuiting the energy regulators. The device was down again, and this time, the problem wasn't just a minor glitch, it was a major failure. The jungle had thrown its worst at the Energizer yet, and this time, it felt like there might be no coming back from it. Ben stood in front of the Energizer, eyes narrowing as he inspected the damage. Water had gotten into the circuits, and the energy shields had been overwhelmed by the sheer amount of moisture in the air. The system wasn't responding to his commands, and the data feed was a mess of error codes. "Claire," Ben called to her, his voice sharp with frustration, "can you run a full diagnostic?" Claire nodded, stepping forward to take control of the tablet. She swiped through the interface, her fingers moving swiftly but with evident concern. Ben could see the worry in her eyes as she scanned the malfunctioning data. "Some of the primary modules are fried," she said, her voice low. "The energy regulators, the weather sensors. Ben, we're looking at least 48 hours to fix this, if not longer. If we're lucky." Ben ran a hand through his hair, biting his lip. The pressure was mounting. This was no longer a simple test. This was a failure in the real world, and there was no room for failure when the stakes were this high. "Maybe we should pull out," one of the engineers suggested hesitantly, standing back and looking at the damage. "This is beyond what we planned for. We don't want to waste any more time here." Ben turned and shot the engineer a look, his face stern. "Pull out? No, we're not going anywhere." Ben's heart was racing as he paced back and forth in the mud-soaked clearing. It was like the jungle itself was conspiring against them. The incessant rain, the humidity, the animals, they all seemed to be saying the same thing. "You're not ready for this." He stepped away from the team for a moment, walking over to a patch of dirt near the riverbank. The sounds of the jungle swirled around him. The distant calls of birds, the rustling of leaves, the quiet hum of insects. The Energizer had been through so much already. Everything from the heat of the desert to the wild winds in the jungle. It had survived, adapted, and overcome. But this was something different. This was a problem Ben had never faced before. He gazed out at the river, the water flowing fast and powerful. The jungle had its own rhythm, its own way of doing things. It didn't care about plans, or technology, or genius ideas. It was wild. And if the Energizer was going to survive, it had to learn to coexist with that wildness. Ben's mind clicked. He needed to stop thinking of the jungle as an obstacle to be overcome. Instead, he needed to work with it, not against it. He had to stop trying to force the Energizer into his vision of a perfect system and embrace the chaos that came with the environment. It was time for a new approach. Ben gathered the team back together and addressed them with a newfound resolve. We've been trying to force the Energizer to fit into a world that's not built for it. But maybe we've been looking at it wrong. This jungle, this entire environment, it's not a problem. It's an opportunity. The engineers looked at him skeptically, unsure of what he was getting at. Instead of fighting nature, Ben continued, we need to work with it. We need to stop designing the Energizer as a machine that controls everything. Instead, let's make it flexible. Let's give it the ability to adapt naturally. Claire raised an eyebrow. You mean we should stop trying to make it perfect? Let it evolve with the environment instead of relying on our adjustments. Ben nodded. Exactly. Let it be part of the environment. Let it evolve to work in harmony with nature, not just fight against it. If we can make it smart enough to adjust based on what's happening around it, it won't just survive the jungle, it'll thrive. The team, though still uncertain, began to shift their focus. The Energizer had been designed as a cutting-edge piece of technology, but Ben realized that the next step was organic evolution, allowing it to learn and adapt based on the surroundings it was placed in. If they could reprogram it to respond dynamically to the challenges of the jungle, it might just have a chance. The work that followed was intense. Ben and Claire spent long hours overhauling the software, rewriting code, and rerouting the energy systems. They designed new sensors that could monitor the environment in real time, allowing the Energizer to adjust its solar panels, wind turbines, and energy shielding on the fly. Ben added one key element, a self-learning algorithm that would allow the Energizer to gradually improve its performance based on real-time environmental data. The device would no longer just react to conditions. It would learn how to anticipate them. By the time the first light of dawn broke through the jungle canopy, the changes had been made. The Energizer was ready for another test, but this time, Ben had no guarantees. He had no idea if this would work, but he knew one thing. He wasn't backing down, and he wasn't leaving until the Energizer had proven itself. With the device reconfigured and the team on high alert, Ben powered up the Energizer once more. He stood beside it, hands clasped together in front of him, watching as the system slowly booted up. There was no turning back now. The first rainstorm hit within an hour, but this time, the Energizer reacted differently. The solar panels adjusted smoothly to the light changes. The wind turbines began spinning in sync with the breeze. And most importantly, the humidity didn't seem to affect the system as severely as before. Ben watched as the data fed into his tablet, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The Energizer was adjusting on its own. It was becoming part of the jungle, not an outsider trying to control it. For the first time since the mission began, Ben allowed himself to feel a sense of pride. It wasn't perfect. There were still kinks to iron out, and the jungle would continue to test the device. But it was working. The Energizer was no longer a fragile machine. It was alive in a way. It was adapting, learning, and thriving in the harshest conditions imaginable. And for Ben, that was enough for now. As the days dragged on, the Energizer began to stabilize in the jungle environment. The system was no longer just reacting to the elements. It was learning, evolving, and adapting to its surroundings in ways Ben hadn't even anticipated. The self-learning algorithm was proving to be more effective than anyone had hoped. But despite the improvements, the challenges didn't stop. Nature was unpredictable, and each new day brought a fresh set of obstacles. The jungle was beautiful and dangerous in equal measure, and Ben knew that if the Energizer was going to succeed, it had to prove itself in every possible scenario. One morning, after several successful days of operation, the team was startled by a loud, thundering sound that shook the ground beneath their feet. Ben's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the rumble of an approaching storm. This was something else entirely. The engineers scrambled to assess the situation, but Ben was already running toward the Energizer. A herd of wild boars, driven by hunger and curiosity, had charged through the clearing. They were large, powerful, and destructive. Within seconds, the Energizer's wind turbines were knocked over, their blades bent and broken from the stampede. Solar panels were trampled under the boars' hooves, their fragile glass shattered into pieces. Ben's pulse surged in his ears. This wasn't just a minor malfunction. This was total destruction. "Get them out of here," Ben shouted to his team, rushing toward the wreckage. The boars were still milling around, confused and aggressive, but they were starting to move out of the clearing. The damage had already been done. The Energizer was in tatters. Ben dropped to his knees in front of the machine, his fingers tracing the broken glass of the solar panels, the twisted metal of the turbines. The team gathered around him, staring at the wreckage in shock. "It's over," one engineer said quietly. "We can't fix this." Ben didn't respond. His mind was racing. The Energizer was supposed to be indestructible. It was built to withstand the harshest environments. But how could they have predicted that wild animals would destroy their progress in seconds? But as he stood there, staring at the damage, a thought began to form in his mind. The Energizer had always been designed to be resilient, but now it needed to be protected. He could no longer afford to rely on sheer strength alone. They had to design it to withstand even the most unpredictable of threats. Ben and the team spent the next few days in damage control mode. They set up an immediate perimeter around the Energizer, reinforcing it with a sturdy fence to keep wild animals away. They used heavier, more durable materials to rebuild the wind turbines, designed to be resistant to physical impacts. The solar panels, once fragile, were replaced with more rugged, flexible versions that could bend without breaking under pressure. But as Ben worked with the engineers, something became clear. The Energizer wasn't just a machine that could power communities. It was now a symbol of resilience, innovation, and persistence. And Ben wasn't going to let it fail. Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly, applying all the lessons learned from the previous failures. They reinforced the outer shell of the Energizer, designed a new energy barrier to protect the systems during physical disturbances, and added even more self-learning components to allow it to adjust to its surroundings faster and more effectively. But the jungle still had more challenges waiting. By the time they were ready to restart the Energizer, the rain was back, this time heavier and more persistent than before. The storm clouds gathered ominously, casting dark shadows over the already humid jungle. The engineers set to work recalibrating the system, but Ben was acutely aware that this wasn't just about weather patterns anymore. This was about time. They had no guarantee that the new improvements would be enough. "Ben, the data's showing another system malfunction," Claire said, her voice tight. Ben stepped over, watching the feed with growing concern. The Energizer was still struggling to adjust to the extreme humidity. The self-regulating system was working, but not fast enough. "Let me take a look," Ben said, frustration beginning to creep into his voice. As he examined the data, he quickly identified the problem. The humidity sensors were too slow to react to the rapid changes in air moisture. The Energizer had been designed to work in fluctuating conditions, but it hadn't been designed to handle such drastic shifts. He clicked into the sensor diagnostics and adjusted the response speed of the system. It was a risky move. This kind of recalibration wasn't something they had planned for in the jungle, but Ben knew they had to take the risk. This was the final test. If the Energizer couldn't adjust quickly enough in the jungle, it couldn't be considered a universal solution. The rain continued to pour as Ben inputted the changes. Claire watched him, her expression a mix of hope and uncertainty. "Now we wait," Ben muttered, his eyes focused on the system's status. He could feel the pressure building. The clock was ticking. As night fell and the storm intensified, something unexpected happened. The Energizer, for the first time since its arrival in the jungle, began to show signs of true resilience. The system started to hum, its turbines beginning to spin at an optimal rate. The solar panels, even under the thick canopy, adjusted perfectly to the slivers of light that filtered through the storm clouds. The Energizer had come alive. It had learned from its failures, adapted to the environment, and was now working in ways no one had thought possible. The team stood in awe as the lights of the camp flickered on, powered by the very system they had almost given up on. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. And for the first time since the beginning of the mission, Ben allowed himself to feel a sense of victory. "We did it," Claire whispered, a look of relief washing over her. Ben nodded, but he wasn't finished yet. "This is just the beginning." As the storm finally began to subside and the jungle returned to its usual rhythm, Ben stood in front of the Energizer, reflecting on the journey they had just been through. The Energizer was no longer just a machine. It was a living, breathing testament to what could happen when human ingenuity met nature's unpredictable forces. It hadn't been easy. In fact, it had been far harder than he could have ever imagined. The Energizer had been knocked down, destroyed, and challenged at every turn. But with each setback, it had grown stronger, more resilient. And now, it was finally working the way it was meant to. But there was one lesson Ben had learned through it all. Resilience is not about never failing. It's about learning how to rise stronger every time you fall. Ben turned to Claire, a new fire in his eyes. Next, we take it to the next phase, he said. We've proved it works here. Now, we see if it can work everywhere. Claire smiled, nodding in agreement. And with that, they prepared for the next leg of their journey, because the world wasn't going to wait. And neither were they. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The storm had passed, but the jungle's challenges were far from over. Ben and his team had spent the better part of a week repairing the Energizer, tweaking the system to better handle the unpredictable elements of their environment. The wind turbines had been reinforced, the solar panels upgraded to be more resistant to physical impacts, and a new set of self-adjusting moisture sensors had been installed. Everything was starting to look up, until the next test came. Ben stood in front of the machine, watching as the first signs of sunlight broke through the overcast skies. He had just finished a checkup on the system when Claire, who had been running diagnostics, suddenly called out to him. Ben, you need to see this. Ben walked over, his mind already racing with what might be wrong. Claire was standing in front of the tablet, her finger pointing to a series of data spikes. What is it? Ben asked, scanning the screen. It's the humidity levels again, she said. They've gone off the charts in the last few hours. The system is compensating, but I think it's starting to push the limits. Ben's heart sank. The self-adjusting feature had worked for a time, but it seemed like they had reached the limits of what it could handle. The jungle, ever unpredictable, was once again showing its wild side. He ran a hand through his hair. The Energizer was supposed to work under extreme conditions, but these rapid, unpredictable shifts in weather weren't something they had been fully prepared for. All right, let's troubleshoot, Ben said, taking a deep breath. We need to figure out what's causing this surge. The team worked late into the night. They sat around the main table in their makeshift command center, each person focused on a different aspect of the Energizer's operations. The problem, however, wasn't easily solvable. Every time they recalibrated the system to adjust to the higher humidity levels, something else seemed to break down. The moisture sensors, the energy regulators, even the self-learning algorithm that had been so effective just days before, nothing was giving them the result they needed. Ben, I think we're missing something, Claire said, standing up and walking over to the whiteboard that covered the wall of the small tent. She picked up a marker and began drawing. Ben walked over, studying the lines she was sketching. What are you thinking? I think we're looking at this from the wrong perspective, she said, drawing a set of arrows in a circle. Right now, we're focusing on all the external factors, the wind, the rain, the humidity. But there's something we haven't considered, internal factors. The systems inside the Energizer itself could be affecting how it adapts to the environment. Ben furrowed his brow, trying to understand. You mean, the self-learning algorithm is too slow? No, Claire responded quickly. I mean that the algorithm might be too responsive. It could be adjusting too frequently, overwhelming the system. The problem is, the internal systems might not have the bandwidth to keep up with the environmental shifts. If the algorithm is adjusting too much, too quickly, it could be causing the instability we're seeing. Ben took a step back. The idea was risky, but it made sense. The Energizer's self-learning algorithm was designed to respond to changes in real time. But if it was reacting too rapidly, it might be causing cascading failures in other components of the system. What are you suggesting? Ben asked, his voice now a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Claire smiled. We need to slow it down. Give the system time to process the changes before it makes adjustments. Let it learn at a slower pace. The next morning, the team worked on implementing Claire's suggestion. They rewrote portions of the algorithm to introduce a delay in the system's response. Instead of instant adjustments, The Energizer would now take a few moments to process environmental changes and predict the best course of action. The work was exhausting, but after hours of programming and troubleshooting, they finally made the changes. Ben felt a sense of cautious optimism as they booted up the Energizer one last time. Claire stepped back, taking a deep breath. All right, let's see if this works. The first few hours were quiet. The team watched intently as the Energizer adjusted to the fluctuating conditions, slowly and methodically. It seemed to be working, but Ben knew better than to celebrate too soon. They had seen this before. Just as they were starting to feel the weight of uncertainty again, a new challenge appeared on the horizon. A large wildfire was spreading through the jungle, threatening the camp. The thick, smoke-filled air was beginning to affect the Energizer's air filtration system, and the heat from the fire was creating a surge of demand on the power grid. Ben's stomach dropped. This was it, the test of a lifetime. Get the Energizer into full power mode, Ben barked to his team. We're going to need all the energy we can get to keep the systems running and protect the camp. The wildfire grew larger by the hour, the flames consuming everything in their path. Thick smoke curled into the sky, obscuring the once bright sunlight. The temperature in the camp rose rapidly, and the Energizer's self-regulating system kicked into overdrive. For the first time since their arrival, the Energizer was truly put to the test. But this time, instead of struggling to adapt, the system responded with calm precision. The wind turbines spun faster, converting the rising heat into usable energy. The solar panels adjusted to the lack of sunlight, using the heat of the fire to power the Energizer's systems. The self-learning algorithm processed the changes with a delay that gave the system just enough time to adjust and avoid overload. The fire raged on for hours, but the Energizer remained steady. The team worked tirelessly to ensure the power grid held up, using the available energy to maintain air filtration, lighting, and communications. By the time the fire finally subsided and the jungle began to quiet, Ben stood outside the Energizer, staring at the machine. He was covered in soot, his eyes bloodshot from the smoke, but there was a fierce determination in his gaze. "We did it," Claire said, her voice hoarse from hours of smoke and heat. Ben nodded slowly, his heart still racing. "It's not perfect," he said, "but it's better than I ever thought it could be." The Energizer passed its first true test, and it didn't just survive, it thrived. As the camp settled into a fragile peace, Ben sat alone by the riverbank, watching the rippling water. The Energizer had proven itself capable of withstanding the fire, the storms, and the wild boars. But the journey was far from over. What they had accomplished was just the beginning. The real test would be taking this technology to the world, spreading it to other communities that needed it. But for now, Ben allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He had learned that resilience wasn't just about building something to withstand adversity. It was about learning from failure and adapting when necessary. It was about embracing the chaos and finding order within it. And as he stood up to rejoin his team, he felt ready for whatever came next. Because now, no matter what the jungle threw at him, he knew one thing. The Energizer would be there, learning and growing, just like him. The aftermath of the wildfire was a defining moment for the team. The Energizer had faced its most demanding test, and, against all odds, it had not only survived, it had thrived. The system had weathered the jungle's brutal forces and, in the process, proven its worth as a revolutionary tool for sustainable energy. Ben felt a new surge of pride and relief as he sat with Claire and the team around a small campfire one evening, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. "We've done it," Ben said, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "We've shown the world that this technology works, no matter what nature throws at it." Claire, who had been quiet for most of the day, nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, but we can't stop here. We have to prove it can work in real-world conditions, places that are far more complex than this jungle." Ben's smile faded slightly. He knew what she meant. The jungle had been tough, but it had only been a controlled test. If they wanted the Energizer to be the global solution they dreamed of, they had to take it to areas facing real, urgent energy crises, places like drought-stricken Africa, isolated regions in Asia, or the storm-ravaged coasts of the Americas, places where the stakes were much higher. It didn't take long for the news of the Energizer's success to reach the outside world. Within days, Ben's team began receiving messages, calls, and emails from all corners of the globe. It was as if the world was finally waking up to the potential of what they had created. One morning, while Ben and Claire were reviewing new data from the Energizer, a call came through from their headquarters in New York. The caller ID flashed the name of their CEO, Ellen Marshall. Ben grabbed the phone, taking a deep breath. The pressure was mounting, and he knew the conversation would change everything. Ben, I'm thrilled to hear the Energizer is holding up so well in the field. Ellen's voice crackled over the line. But I have a request. We need to move forward with a global expansion plan, and fast. Ben exchanged a glance with Claire. The words global expansion sent a surge of both excitement and fear through him. What's the plan? Ben asked, trying to keep his tone steady. I've been in talks with several governments, places in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean, Ellen continued. They've seen what you've done in the jungle, and they're eager to implement the Energizer. But we need to prove it can scale, not just in a remote setting, but in places that are high risk and high demand. Ben let out a long breath. This was the moment they'd been working toward, the opportunity to change the world. But he knew that with such a high-profile rollout, the risks were amplified. The Energizer had performed well in the jungle, but the real test was still ahead. I understand, Ben said, his mind racing. What's the timeline? The first deployment could be within a few months, Ellen replied. We'll start with a pilot program in 2 countries. You'll need to fine-tune the system's scalability and make sure it can withstand all types of external pressures, from extreme weather to logistical challenges. Ben rubbed his temples. Okay, we're going to need more time and resources to get everything in place. The system is still vulnerable in certain areas. We need to test it on a larger scale. I'm giving you the resources you need, Ben, Ellen reassured him. You've earned it. The world is watching, and I believe you're the one who can make this work. Ben nodded, though his mind was already churning with 1,000 different concerns. All right, let's do it. The days following the call were a blur of activity. The team worked non-stop to prepare the Energizer for its next phase, a global rollout. The initial pilot projects would take place in Zambia and Haiti, 2 countries that faced significant energy shortages, but also had a history of extreme weather patterns, from intense heat waves to hurricanes. Ben and Claire reviewed every aspect of the system, double-checking the energy models and running simulations. The Energizer had to perform flawlessly. If they couldn't make it work in places like these, the dream of a sustainable energy revolution would end before it even began. The real challenge was the logistics. Transporting the Energizer to remote areas required innovative solutions. Heavy machinery had to be dismantled and packed carefully for long journeys across oceans and rugged terrain. They had to ensure the technology would hold up in extreme conditions during transport, then function properly after being reassembled. The team worked tirelessly, often through the night. Ben's leadership and determination were apparent. He had been through setbacks, failures, and disasters in the jungle, but now, with the world's attention on him, his confidence was unshakable. Still, he felt the weight of the responsibility. This was no longer just about technology. This was about people's lives. The first shipment of Energizer systems arrived in Zambia under the blistering heat of the African sun. The country had been facing severe power shortages for years, and many of its rural villages had limited access to electricity. Ben stood alongside Claire, watching as the massive crates containing the Energizer systems were unloaded from the transport trucks. They were in a small village near the border with Zimbabwe, one of the pilot locations where the technology would be tested. The villagers, curious but skeptical, had gathered around the site. As Ben walked toward the group, a young man named Kofi, who had been appointed by the local government as a point of contact for the project, stepped forward. He was tall, with dark, intelligent eyes, and an air of quiet authority. Kofi, Ben greeted him, extending his hand. Thank you for helping us bring this to your community. Kofi smiled but looked cautiously at the crates being unloaded. We've seen many projects come and go, Ben, he said. There's a lot of hope here, but there's also a lot of doubt. People are afraid that once the project is gone, the energy will disappear too. Ben understood the skepticism. "I know how you feel," he said sincerely. "This isn't just about bringing power to the village. It's about ensuring that the technology is here to stay. This system will adapt to your needs and continue to grow with you." Kofi nodded, but his expression was still serious. "Then let's make sure it works." The team quickly began assembling the Energizer system, using the expertise they had gained from their experiences in the jungle. The equipment was carefully set up, and a solar field was established nearby. For the first time, the Energizer would be tested in a real-world, high-demand environment. As the sun began to set on their first day in Zambia, the system powered on. The village lights flickered to life, illuminating the dirt roads and modest homes that had been in the dark for years. The team stood in awe as the energy grid began to stabilize, and power flowed smoothly to every corner of the village. The villagers cheered, their voices rising in a chorus of excitement and disbelief. For the first time in years, they had reliable electricity. Ben looked over at Kofi, who was smiling for the first time since they arrived. The young man clasped Ben's shoulder, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You did it," he said. "This is the future." Ben smiled back, feeling a swell of pride in his chest. But this was just the beginning. They still had work to do. The pilot project had shown promise, but now they needed to scale it. As the night settled in, with the village illuminated by the steady hum of the Energizer, Ben realized one thing. This was only the beginning of a much larger journey, a journey that would change the world. The Energizer had passed its first real test with flying colors. The village in Zambia was glowing with energy, the system running smoothly as the village flourished under its power. But even as the people celebrated, Ben and his team knew that their work was far from over. They still had a long road ahead. Haiti was next on the list, and the system had to prove itself on an entirely different scale. Haiti was no stranger to disaster. Years of political instability, combined with frequent natural disasters like hurricanes and earthquakes, had left the country in a constant state of recovery. Its infrastructure was crumbling, and electricity was scarce in rural areas. Ben knew the stakes were high. If the Energizer could work in Haiti, it could work anywhere. But there was another layer of complexity this time. Hurricanes? After the success in Zambia, the team took a brief respite. However, they couldn't afford to rest for long. The news out of Haiti was troubling. The government had requested an expedited deployment, as they were expecting the possibility of a major hurricane in the coming weeks. The need for sustainable energy had never been greater, and the Energizer could be the answer, but only if it could withstand the full force of a Caribbean storm. Ben and Claire stood on the deck of the cargo ship that was taking them to Haiti, the salty wind whipping through their hair as they gazed out over the open sea. The journey was long, but it gave them time to review the data and double-check the plans for deployment. "Do you think it'll hold up?" Claire asked, her eyes squinting as she scanned the horizon. The ocean seemed endless in every direction, a metaphor for the overwhelming task ahead. "I don't know," Ben admitted. The Energizer performed well in Zambia, but those were different conditions. We're going to face wind speeds in excess of 150 miles per hour, and the storm surge could overwhelm any systems we try to set up. We'll need to make sure everything's waterproof and reinforced. Claire nodded, though her concern was still palpable. "We've got this far. We just need to keep the momentum going." Ben looked at her, knowing that she was right. They had come this far, and they couldn't afford to let doubt hold them back now. He had learned in the jungle and in Zambia that resilience came from adapting to the environment. The Energizer had to do the same. The ship docked in the port city of Cap-Haitian, one of Haiti's largest and most densely populated areas. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of salt water and earth mingling in the tropical heat. The team quickly unloaded the crates containing the Energizer systems, along with the solar panels, wind turbines, and other components that would power the energy grid. The Haitian government had arranged for a local workforce to assist with the deployment, but there was a palpable sense of urgency in the air. Ben and his team immediately began setting up the system, their minds racing against the clock as they knew the hurricane was fast approaching. In the distance, they could already see the storm clouds forming, a dark, ominous mass that seemed to grow with each passing hour. Ben and Claire led the charge, working tirelessly with the local crew to assemble the Energizer. They reinforced the solar panels with protective coatings, ensured the wind turbines were securely mounted, and ran tests to make sure the system would be able to handle any surge in demand once the storm hit. As the first winds of the hurricane started to pick up, Ben could feel his heart racing. It was one thing to face a challenge in the jungle or a remote village, but facing a full-on hurricane was something else entirely. This wasn't just about energy, it was about survival. That night, the storm came in full force. The howling winds battered the coastline, and the sea surged higher with each passing minute. The Energizer was set up as best as they could, but no one knew how it would fare once the hurricane made landfall. The team huddled together in their makeshift shelter, the sound of the storm deafening outside. Ben couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the system. The pressure was mounting. This was their defining moment. If the Energizer could withstand the hurricane, it would prove that it could work anywhere, no matter the conditions. But if it failed, all of their progress would be in jeopardy. Claire walked over to him, sensing his unease. "Ben, we've done everything we can," she said, her voice calm. "Now we just have to wait." "I know," Ben replied, "but it's hard not to think about what's at stake. We're not just testing a system here. We're testing the future." Claire nodded, her gaze unwavering. "And the future is in our hands. But we're not alone. We have the whole world behind us now." The words were simple, but they had a profound effect on Ben. In that moment, he realized that Ellen, the villagers in Zambia, the Haitian government, all of them were relying on him. The pressure was enormous, but he couldn't let it break him. Not now. When dawn finally broke, the winds had subsided, and the storm had passed. The air was thick with humidity, and the landscape had been altered by the hurricane's wrath. Trees had been uprooted, power lines were down, and debris littered the streets. The damage was severe. But there was something else, a sound that Ben hadn't heard in the aftermath of previous storms. The hum of the Energizer. It was still running. Ben and Claire rushed to the site, their hearts pounding in anticipation. The turbines were spinning slowly, the solar panels still absorbing what little sunlight filtered through the clouds. The system was still functioning. They couldn't believe it. The local crew, who had been watching anxiously, broke into applause as the lights in the surrounding areas flickered to life. The Energizer had passed its ultimate test. It had weathered the storm, adapting to the shifting conditions, just as they had designed it to. Kofi, who had traveled with the team from Zambia to oversee the Haitian deployment, looked over at Ben and smiled. "You did it," he said. "The future is here." Ben felt a rush of emotion as he stood there, watching the village slowly come back to life. The lights flickered in homes that had been without power for days, the energy grid was stable, and people were able to access food, water, and medical supplies. The Energizer had delivered. But Ben knew the work was far from finished. They had just demonstrated that sustainable energy could withstand extreme conditions. Now, it was time to scale. There were entire nations to help, entire communities to lift out of darkness. He turned to Claire, his voice full of determination. "This is just the beginning. We've proven it can work. Now, let's bring it to the rest of the world." In the days that followed, as the storm passed and the cleanup began, Ben felt a sense of achievement unlike any he'd known before. They had done more than just deploy a system. They had changed lives. But the challenges ahead were just as daunting. The world needed energy, and the Energizer was the key to unlocking a sustainable future. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but it was the one Ben had chosen. And now, as he looked over the village, powered by the system he and his team had created, he realized that the future wasn't some distant dream. It was happening now. The journey was far from over. The next phase of their mission would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But for now, at least, they had proven that the impossible was possible. And that was just the beginning. The hurricane had passed, and with it, a significant milestone for the Energizer. But for Ben, the work was far from over. He knew that the challenges they faced in Haiti were only the tip of the iceberg. While the Energizer had performed remarkably well under extreme conditions, there were still plenty of hurdles to overcome: political, logistical, and technical. In the days following the storm, the team had been celebrated as heroes. Local officials hailed their success, and the media coverage was intense. News outlets across the world picked up on the story, with headlines like, New technology powers Haitian village after hurricane, and a glimpse of the future of energy. But beneath the accolades and glowing praise, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't seeing, something lurking just beneath the surface. Ben had spent days reviewing the data from the Haitian deployment, combing through every variable, testing every scenario. The Energizer had passed with flying colors, but one question lingered in the back of his mind. What if the next challenge was something they couldn't predict? A new kind of threat, one that was not about nature or logistics, but something more insidious. His thoughts were interrupted when a call came through from Ellen Marshall in New York. "Ben," she began, her voice more serious than he had ever heard it. "I need you to listen carefully. We've received some unsettling news." Ben straightened, instinctively sensing the gravity of the situation. "What's going on?" "There's a large corporation that's been following your progress very closely, more closely than we'd like," Ellen continued. "They've expressed interest in partnering with us, but there's more to it. We've learned that they might have their own energy solutions that they're planning to introduce. And if they're successful, it could derail everything we've worked for." Ben's pulse quickened. The stakes had just been raised. "Who are they?" Ben asked, trying to maintain his composure. "It's Fortis Energy, a multinational conglomerate with major investments in both traditional and renewable energy sources. They've been quietly working on a system that could rival the Energizer, and they've already secured significant backing from several powerful governments and investors." Ben's stomach dropped. He had heard of Fortis Energy, a company known for its vast resources and lobbying power. If they were coming after the Energizer, that meant war. The team huddled in their makeshift headquarters in Haiti, gathered around a projector screen as Claire walked them through the latest developments. "Fortis has a vast network of influence," Claire explained, her voice filled with urgency. "Their lobbying power could shift political support away from us and onto their side. If they can undermine our credibility or discredit the Energizer, they could take the entire market for themselves. We might be out of business before we even get to scale." Ben's mind raced as the implications sank in. Fortis was not just any competitor. They were the Goliath to their David. They had the resources, the reach, and the clout to bury a project like the Energizer in a heartbeat. "So, what do we do?" Ben asked, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We need to make sure that we stay ahead," Claire said. "We need to prove that the Energizer is the best solution out there, no matter the cost. We'll need to get political backing, secure public support, and make sure that our technology is undeniably superior to what Fortis is working on." Ben nodded. He knew they had no time to waste. "Let's get to work." As the weeks passed, Ben and his team faced mounting pressure from every direction. Fortis had already begun making moves. They lobbied governments, pushed for new regulations, and quietly spread rumors about the Energizer's ability to scale. Behind the scenes, they were working tirelessly to outmaneuver Ben's team. In response, Ben accelerated their deployment plans. The team worked relentlessly to prove the system's scalability, performing tests in even more remote and challenging environments. They reached out to local governments, seeking partnerships and offering proof of the Energizer's value. At the same time, they launched an aggressive PR campaign to showcase the Energizer as a game-changer for the global energy crisis. But no matter how fast they moved, Fortis always seemed to be one step ahead. One morning, as Ben sat in his office, scrolling through the latest news, he saw an article that made his blood run cold. Fortis Energy unveils groundbreaking energy storage technology, partners with world leaders for global expansion. It was a blow. They were moving fast, and it seemed like no matter how much Ben and his team accomplished, they couldn't catch up. It was around this time that Ben received a call from Ellen. She sounded shaken, which was rare for her. "Ben," she said quietly, "I've just heard something that might change everything." Ben's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "We've been looking into some of the people you've worked with on the ground in Haiti. And, well, there's one name that keeps coming up." Ben's throat went dry. "What name?" "Kofi," Ellen said. "The man you've been working with, the one who helped with the Haitian deployment. He's been meeting with people from Fortis." Ben's mind raced. Kofi had been their most trusted local partner in Haiti. He was smart, reliable, and, as far as Ben knew, loyal. But now, it seemed like that trust might have been misplaced. "Are you sure?" Ben asked, the disbelief in his voice clear. I'm afraid so, Ellen replied. There's a paper trail, Ben. Kofi's been attending meetings with Fortis representatives and even discussing the Energizer. We don't know exactly what he's been sharing, but it doesn't look good. Ben stood up abruptly, his mind spinning. Could Kofi have been feeding information to Fortis? Had they been betrayed by the very person they trusted the most? The thought of it left Ben feeling numb. I need to talk to him, Ben said, his voice cold. We need to get to the bottom of this. Ben and Claire traveled back to Haiti as quickly as they could, determined to confront Kofi. When they arrived at the makeshift headquarters, Kofi was nowhere to be found. His absence was unsettling. Something wasn't right. They searched the area for hours, questioning the local team members who had worked with Kofi. Finally, they found him, sitting in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. His face was unreadable as he sipped his coffee, his eyes not meeting theirs. Ben took a seat across from him, trying to keep his voice calm. Kofi, we need to talk. Kofi looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. I know why you're here, he said quietly. Then you know what this is about, Ben said, his tone sharp. You've been working with Fortis, haven't you? You've been leaking information. Kofi didn't flinch. It's not what you think. Ben's patience wore thin. Then explain it to me. Kofi's eyes narrowed. I didn't want to be in the middle of this. But Fortis has the resources to bring real change to this country. They promise to make things happen faster, better infrastructure, more jobs, more development. You can't expect to fight them with your technology alone. Ben's heart sank. The betrayal was worse than he had imagined. It wasn't just about money or power. It was about influence. Kofi had been swayed by promises of progress and development. I trusted you, Ben said, his voice low. We all trusted you. Kofi looked down, a flicker of regret in his eyes. I know, but you don't understand what it's like. Fortis controls everything here. They have the power to make things happen. And I just wanted to help my people. Ben sat back, his mind reeling. It was hard to reconcile the man he had worked alongside with the one who had made these choices. But the truth was clear. The stakes had just gotten a lot higher. Fortis wasn't just competing with them. They were playing dirty. And now, it was a race to the finish. The weight of Kofi's betrayal hung in the air like a storm cloud. Ben and Claire left the cafe in silence, the hum of the bustling Haitian streets a distant echo compared to the turmoil in Ben's mind. He had trusted Kofi. The man had been a crucial ally, a friend even. Now, Ben couldn't help but wonder if that trust had been naive. They returned to their makeshift headquarters, where the team was waiting for updates. The mood was tense, a stark contrast to the celebratory atmosphere they'd felt after the hurricane. Everyone could feel it. The shift in the battle they were now fighting. It was no longer just about technology, about proving the Energizer could change the world. It was about survival. Fortis was using every tool at their disposal to crush their vision. And now, they had a mole within their own ranks. Ben sat down at the conference table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Kofi's been leaking information to Fortis. They've been using him to get an edge on us, he said, his voice low. The room was silent for a long moment, and then Claire spoke. We've got to be strategic. We can't just go in guns blazing. If we do, we lose everything. We need to get ahead of Fortis. We need to outmaneuver them, without giving them more ammunition. Ben nodded, his thoughts already racing. Claire's right. We've got to stay one step ahead. We can't afford any more mistakes. But there was something else gnawing at him. If Fortis could manipulate people like Kofi, what was stopping them from doing the same to others? Could they already be in the pockets of local officials? Could this be the beginning of a much larger conspiracy to crush them? We'll need to dig deeper into Fortis, Claire said, breaking through Ben's thoughts. Find out who's behind their moves and what their endgame is. If we can expose them for who they really are, we might turn public opinion in our favor. Ben rubbed his eyes, the exhaustion catching up with him. The fight had taken on a new urgency. He'd known the stakes would be high, but now the enemy wasn't just a corporation. It was a machine. And their adversaries were powerful, connected, and ruthless. The next few days were a whirlwind. Ben and Claire worked around the clock, leveraging every resource they could find. They had to know everything about Fortis, their financial backers, their political ties, their legal maneuvers. But every time they thought they were making progress, Fortis seemed to stay one step ahead. One evening, as Ben sat in his office sifting through yet another stack of documents, Claire walked in, her expression serious. "I think I found something," she said, holding up a file. Ben raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What is it?" "A pattern," she said. "Fortis has been pushing their own energy systems, but there's a larger agenda here. They're not just after market dominance. They're looking to control the energy grid itself." Ben's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "They've been lobbying governments to impose restrictions on solar and wind technology. They're pushing for regulations that favor their own energy solutions, but more importantly, they're trying to make it harder for competitors like us to deploy decentralized energy systems." Ben leaned forward, the pieces clicking into place. "So, they're not just trying to build a better product. They're trying to rig the system so no one else can succeed. It's about control." Claire nodded. "Exactly. If they can make it illegal or impractical to use decentralized energy systems, then they've won. They'll control the future of global energy." Ben's heart sank. The threat was more than just competition. It was an existential one. They weren't just fighting for a piece of the market. They were fighting for the very freedom to choose how the world powered itself. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure continued to mount. The team knew they had to act quickly before Fortis could implement their new regulations. It wasn't just about proving that the Energizer worked. It was about making sure there was space for it to thrive. Ben decided they needed to shift their approach. Instead of just fighting in the shadows, they needed to take their story to the public. They needed to go viral, and they needed someone with influence to help them do it. That's when Claire had an idea. What if we could get someone like Elon Musk on our side? Ben's eyes lit up. Musk? Of course. He's a champion of renewable energy and has been outspoken against the fossil fuel industry. If we can get him to endorse the Energizer, it could shift the entire narrative. But it wasn't just about an endorsement. It was about aligning their vision with someone who had the reach to mobilize millions of people, politicians, and investors. Elon Musk wasn't just a tech mogul. He was a symbol. His support could give them the leverage they needed to counteract Fortis's efforts. Ben quickly made contact with Musk's team, outlining their mission and the urgency of the situation. After a tense few days of back and forth, they received a response. The meeting with Elon Musk was set for the following week. Ben, Claire, and their PR team flew to California, preparing for what they hoped would be a pivotal moment. They had to make their case convincingly. This wasn't just about the Energizer. This was about a global movement. When they arrived at the Tesla headquarters, they were led into a minimalist conference room. Elon Musk himself entered, wearing his signature black t-shirt and jeans, his face carrying the weight of someone constantly thinking 3 steps ahead. "All right," Elon said, leaning back in his chair. "Tell me why I should care about your project." Ben took a deep breath. This was the moment. He couldn't afford to hesitate. "We're fighting for more than just energy," Ben began. "We're fighting for freedom. The future of energy shouldn't be controlled by a handful of corporations. It should be in the hands of the people. Fortis is trying to monopolize the energy market, and they're using their influence to push government regulations that could make systems like ours illegal. If they succeed, the world will be dependent on their technology, and innovation will be stifled." Elon raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "And you think your system can stop them?" "We've already proven that the Energizer works in extreme conditions. Haiti, Zambia, even hurricanes," Claire chimed in. "But we need the political and public momentum to counteract Fortis. We need someone with influence to back us up." Musk's gaze shifted between Ben and Claire, considering their words. After a moment of silence, he finally spoke. "You're right. We can't let Fortis control the future of energy. I'm in. Let's take them down." Ben's heart soared. The backing of Elon Musk was more than just a lifeline. It was a game changer. With Elon Musk's endorsement, the momentum began to shift. News outlets began picking up on the partnership, and public interest in the Energizer skyrocketed. Fortis was now on the defensive. They had the resources, the power, and the influence. But now, they were facing a real threat. The battle was no longer just about technology. It was a fight for the future of energy itself. Ben knew that their next move would be the most important yet. They had to act fast before Fortis could recover. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever. Elon Musk's endorsement was nothing short of a game-changer. Within hours of the announcement, social media exploded with support for the Energizer. Tweets, blog posts, and viral videos spread like wildfire, with people praising the revolutionary technology that had the potential to change the world's energy landscape. News outlets from across the globe picked up the story, with headlines like Elon Musk backs groundbreaking energy system, and the future of energy gets a boost from a 9-year-old prodigy. But while the public excitement was building, Ben knew that Fortis was not going to back down without a fight. They had the resources, the political clout, and the connections. The battle for the future of energy was far from over. In the days following Musk's public endorsement, Ben and his team were inundated with media requests, investor inquiries, and government contacts. The world was watching, and they had to be prepared for every angle. But amidst the flurry of activity, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Fortis had been quiet, too quiet. Claire was the first to spot it. "Ben, look at this," she said, pushing a news article across the table. Ben scanned the headline, "Fortis to launch new energy initiative in developing nations, a game-changer in the fight against climate change." The article outlined how Fortis had begun working with several governments in Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean to implement their own energy solutions. The initiative was presented as a sustainable, eco-friendly alternative to the Energizer, but there was something off about it. The details were vague, and it seemed like a direct response to their own work. "What's their angle?" Ben muttered, leaning closer to the screen. "It's the same playbook they've been using all along," Claire said, her voice sharp. "They're trying to position themselves as the only solution for these countries. They're offering huge incentives, loans, infrastructure deals, and even political support to make sure that no one else gets a foothold. And you can bet they'll use Kofi and others like him to make sure we never get a chance to deploy our system." Ben's jaw clenched. Fortis was playing dirty, leveraging their global power to outmaneuver them in the places where the Energizer was most needed. "Then we're going to have to play smarter," Ben said. "We can't just go head-to-head with them in these regions. We need to get ahead of their narrative, show the world what they're really doing." With Fortis using its influence to make global moves, Ben realized the next step was clear. They had to expose Fortis for what they truly were: corporate giants, manipulating countries and people for profit, all while pretending to be the saviors of the environment. Claire had an idea. "What if we flip the script on them?" she suggested. "We already have Elon's backing. Let's use that to launch a global transparency campaign. We'll show how Fortis is really just using the energy crisis to manipulate governments for their own financial gain. We'll call it #EnergyForAll. Ben liked the sound of that. It wasn't just about technology. It was about empowering people, not controlling them. The Energizer was more than a product. It was a symbol of freedom, of decentralizing power and giving it back to the people. If they could harness that message and put it in front of the world, they might just turn the tide in their favor. The team worked tirelessly over the next few days, crafting a strategy that included a global press conference, online videos, and a powerful message that would resonate with the masses. They called on influencers, activists, and political leaders who shared their vision to help amplify the campaign. And then, the day came. The live broadcast was set from Los Angeles, with Ben, Claire, and Elon Musk standing before a packed audience of reporters, environmental activists, and tech innovators. The stage was simple, just a screen behind them with a single word: freedom. Ben took the microphone, his heart racing. The world was watching. This was their moment to take control of the narrative. "We stand here today," Ben began, "not just to talk about energy. We're here to talk about empowerment. Energy is the lifeblood of our world. But what if it's controlled by just a few? What if the future of energy is decided by a handful of corporations whose primary interest is profit, not the well-being of the people?" He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The crowd was silent, hanging on his every syllable. "Fortis claims to be the solution, but we know the truth. They're not in it to help the world. They're in it to control it. They're manipulating governments, pushing countries into debt, and making them dependent on their energy systems. They're using climate change as an excuse to dominate, when the truth is they're just trying to lock us into a future where they hold all the power." Ben stepped back slightly, and Claire took the microphone. But it doesn't have to be this way. The Energizer is proof that there's another way. A way where people control their own energy, where no one is left behind, where we don't rely on corporations to tell us how we can power our homes, our cities, or our countries. It's time for a new era, a people-powered energy future. Ben joined her again, his voice firm. This is bigger than technology. This is about freedom. #EnergyForAll. The crowd erupted into applause, and the press room filled with excitement. They could see the story spreading like wildfire. The message was clear. Fortis was a corporate giant hiding behind a facade of sustainability, while the Energizer was about freedom and decentralization. As expected, Fortis was quick to respond. Within hours, they issued a statement denouncing the Energizer, calling their campaign misleading and harmful to global cooperation in the fight against climate change. They attacked Ben personally, calling him a young, inexperienced inventor with no real understanding of global energy dynamics. But the public wasn't buying it. The narrative was shifting. People were beginning to see through Fortis's tactics, and the spotlight was squarely on their manipulation of vulnerable countries. And then, the bombshell came. A whistleblower from Fortis came forward, revealing a trove of internal documents showing how the corporation had been bribing officials, inflating project costs, and suppressing alternative technologies to maintain their monopoly. With this new information, the floodgates opened. Governments began to investigate Fortis, and public pressure mounted. People everywhere rallied behind the idea of a decentralized energy future. The Energizer was no longer just a product, it was a movement. Ben and Claire knew that this was their chance. They began negotiating with international organizations, offering the Energizer as the solution to the world's energy crisis. The message was simple: empower people, not corporations. And as the final piece of the puzzle fell into place, Fortis began to unravel. Investors pulled out. Governments reevaluated their contracts. The tide had finally turned in favor of the Energizer. The world had shifted. The Energizer was no longer just an ambitious project led by a group of visionary technologists. It had become the symbol of a new era, an era of freedom, decentralization, and empowerment. It was a rallying cry for the masses, the underdogs, the rebels who were tired of corporate control and political manipulation. But despite the overwhelming public support, Ben knew they hadn't won yet. Fortis still held a powerful grip over key industries, governments, and influential players. The game was far from over. The Energizer was the future, but Fortis wasn't going to give up their monopoly without a fight. Over the following weeks, the pressure mounted on both sides. Fortis scrambled to shore up their reputation, pushing back against the growing tide of public outrage. Their legal teams were working overtime to suppress the whistleblower documents, while their PR machine churned out carefully crafted rebuttals to the #EnergyForAll campaign. But it wasn't working. The world had seen the truth, and once the veil had been lifted, there was no going back. The people had chosen their side. In the midst of the storm, Ben and Claire focused on their next move. They had to get their technology into the hands of those who needed it most, and they had to do it fast. The more momentum they gained, the more Fortis would try to thwart their progress, whether through political interference or underhanded tactics. The clock was ticking. Ben was sitting in the war room late one evening, scrolling through emails, when his phone buzzed. It was an encrypted message from a familiar name. Kofi. Ben stared at the screen for a moment, his heart racing. Was this a trap? A trick to bring them down? Or was it something else? He hesitated, but ultimately decided to open the message. It was short, but it carried weight. I know what you're up against. I've seen enough to realize what's at stake. I can help. Ben felt a strange mix of emotions. Kofi had betrayed them once before, but now, it seemed like he was asking for redemption. Ben wasn't sure if he could trust him, but he knew that right now, any ally could make a difference. He quickly typed a reply. Meet me in the usual place. The next day, Ben and Claire met Kofi in a nondescript cafe near their headquarters. The air was thick with tension. Kofi was seated at a corner table, nervously looking over his shoulder as though expecting someone to show up. When he saw Ben and Claire approach, he stood up. I know I don't deserve your trust, Kofi began, his voice low. But you have to understand, I was playing the game Fortis wanted me to play. They promised me power, influence, everything I thought I wanted. But now, I see things clearly. They've been manipulating everyone, including me. Ben crossed his arms, eyeing Kofi carefully. And what exactly do you want from us? I have information, inside information, about Fortis' final move. They're preparing to make a play that will completely cripple your ability to distribute the Energizer, Kofi said, his voice filled with urgency. They've been negotiating with governments in several key regions to pass emergency legislation that will block decentralized energy projects. Ben felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of legislation? They're going to declare the Energizer and similar technologies as a national security threat, Kofi said, his eyes darting nervously. They'll argue that because the Energizer is a disruptive force, it could jeopardize global stability, and they're going to use it as an excuse to shut down any independent power generation. Ben clenched his fists. This was their worst fear realized. If Fortis could get the Energizer classified as a threat, they could shut it down worldwide with the stroke of a pen. How soon? Claire asked, her voice calm but filled with intensity. Within days, Kofi replied. They're planning to move fast, and they've already started working with key lawmakers in the US, EU, and China. If you don't act quickly, it might be too late. Ben's mind was racing. What's the play? Kofi hesitated before answering. I can help you disrupt their plans, but it's risky. If we move now, we'll have to expose Fortis' hand completely. It'll mean going after their top-level connections, everything they've worked to keep hidden. It could be dangerous, but it's the only way to stop them. Ben's eyes narrowed. This was the moment. They could take Fortis down once and for all, but it would mean exposing everything. I'm in, Ben said. Let's do it. Kofi's inside knowledge was invaluable. With his help, the team was able to gather the necessary information to infiltrate Fortis' network. They used cyber intelligence, social engineering, and the legal loopholes that Kofi had already begun to uncover. Their plan was simple yet audacious. They would expose Fortis to the world, and in doing so, they would dismantle the foundation of their power. But it wasn't just about revealing the truth. It was about taking Fortis down so completely that they would never be able to recover. Ben and Claire spent days preparing their counterattack. They reached out to key journalists who had been following Fortis for years, gathered supporting evidence from whistleblowers, and set up a press conference that would break the news to the world. But as the final pieces fell into place, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Fortis was smart. They had resources at their disposal, and they wouldn't take this lying down. They needed to act fast. The day of the press conference arrived, and it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. The stakes had never been higher. If they succeeded, they would not only expose Fortis' corruption, but they would also guarantee a future where the Energizer could thrive. Ben, Claire, and Kofi stood on stage, their faces grim but determined. The world's media was present, cameras flashing, microphones ready. Ben took a deep breath and stepped forward. Today, we're going to show the world what Fortis doesn't want you to see. We're going to expose their manipulation, their greed, and their stranglehold over global energy. And we're going to make sure that the future of energy is in the hands of the people, not corporations. He motioned to Kofi, who clicked a button on his laptop. The screen behind them lit up with a series of damning documents, showing Fortis executives making deals with world leaders, bribing officials, and plotting to shut down any technology that posed a threat to their monopoly. The press room erupted in shock. The truth was out, and this time, there would be no turning back. The press conference was a watershed moment. The exposure of Fortis' corruption and manipulation sent shockwaves across the globe. Headlines splashed across every major news outlet. Videos of the conference went viral. People everywhere began to see what Ben, Claire, and Kofi had known all along. Fortis wasn't a savior. They were a monopoly, willing to exploit every vulnerability for profit, at the expense of the planet and its people. But as the world celebrated the victory, Ben felt a nagging sense of unease. Fortis was not the kind of company to fold easily. They had immense power, resources, and allies. This exposure was only the beginning of a much larger battle. If they didn't act quickly, Fortis would strike back with everything they had. In the days following the reveal, there was an outpouring of support for the Energizer and its mission to decentralize energy. Activists, environmental groups, and ordinary people took to the streets in protest against Fortis, demanding transparency, accountability, and a future powered by the people, not by corporations. Governments, under pressure from their citizens, began to question their ties to the energy giant. But the most significant development came from the international community. The United Nations called an emergency meeting to discuss the energy crisis. For the first time in history, they acknowledged the possibility of decentralized energy as a legitimate solution. But there was a catch. The Energizer wasn't the only option on the table. Some countries, notably those aligned with Fortis, pushed for alternatives that still kept power in the hands of a few. "It's clear that the world is ready for change," Ben said to Claire as they prepared for a strategy session. "But we need to keep our momentum. If Fortis can control the narrative, they'll push their agenda under the guise of global cooperation." Claire nodded, her brow furrowed. "We need to take the next step, and fast. The Energizer's success isn't just about technology anymore. It's about building a global coalition. We can't let them isolate us." Just as Ben and Claire were strategizing their next move, the Fortis backlash came, loud, coordinated, and fierce. The company's legal team filed lawsuits in multiple jurisdictions, claiming that their reputation had been irreparably damaged by the #EnergyForAll campaign. They accused Ben and his team of slander and misrepresentation, seeking damages in the billions. At the same time, Fortis's lobbyists went into overdrive, targeting key lawmakers in the US, EU, and China to pass legislation that would curtail the use of decentralized energy systems. "We knew they'd fight back, but this?" Ben's voice was tight as he reviewed the legal documents in front of him. "They're going all in. They have too much at stake." "I told you they wouldn't go quietly," Claire replied, her voice calm but filled with determination. "We have to hit them where it hurts." Ben leaned back in his chair. "We're going to need something bigger than just more media attention. We need to rally the world behind us. It's time to make it clear that the future of energy isn't just a choice, it's a moral imperative." Ben and Claire launched a campaign unlike anything the world had seen before. Their mission was clear: stop Fortis, save the planet. They partnered with environmental NGOs, grassroots organizations, and independent tech companies to create a worldwide coalition dedicated to pushing back against corporate control of energy. They called it the Global Energy Uprising. It wasn't just about pushing back against Fortis anymore. It was about creating a global energy movement that would forever change how people thought about energy, ownership, and power. The message was clear: energy for the people, not for profits. Their efforts went viral. Celebrities, activists, and influencers joined the cause, creating powerful content that spread across social media platforms. But the movement wasn't just about online support. Protests erupted in cities worldwide. The streets were filled with people marching for their right to access clean, sustainable energy without the influence of corporations controlling the taps. And as the world rallied behind the Energizer, the pressure on Fortis became insurmountable. The company's stock began to plummet. Governments that had once been in their pocket began to reassess their dealings. Fortis had become a pariah. But just when it seemed that victory was within reach, Fortis launched its final, desperate counterattack. They had begun targeting Ben personally, leveraging their massive media reach to discredit him and his team. They started spreading rumors about Ben's past, painting him as an opportunistic fraud, a boy genius with no real understanding of global energy markets. They dug deep, attempting to tarnish his image, using the kind of corporate smear tactics that Ben had hoped to avoid. "They're going after your reputation," Claire said, her eyes fixed on the news feed. "They're not going to let up." Ben clenched his fists, but he wasn't going to let Fortis dictate the narrative. "Let them try. This isn't about me. This is about a future where the world is no longer enslaved by monopolies, where energy is a right, not a privilege." With their backs against the wall, Ben, Claire, and Kofi began their final push. They had one last card to play, and it involved exposing the dark underbelly of Fortis, the connections that had allowed them to manipulate governments, silence whistleblowers, and operate unchecked for decades. Kofi's information proved invaluable once again. He revealed the existence of a secret network of offshore accounts, bribery schemes, and hidden lobbyist efforts designed to maintain Fortis's stranglehold on the energy industry. Armed with this evidence, Ben's team worked with international journalists to expose everything. They had leaked documents and corrupt deals, information that no amount of PR spin could cover up. The news broke, and the world reacted with fury. Governments moved quickly to investigate Fortis. Their leaders were called to testify before international panels. The company's influence began to evaporate, and their plans to suppress the Energizer were dismantled piece by piece. As the dust settled, it was clear that Fortis was no longer a force to be reckoned with. Ben and his team had won, not just in the courtrooms or the boardrooms, but in the hearts and minds of people around the world. The Energizer was now seen as the symbol of a new energy revolution, one that belonged to the people, not to corporations. The future was no longer in the hands of a few wealthy elites. It was in the hands of millions, people who would now have access to clean, sustainable energy on their own terms. Ben stood in front of a crowd at the United Nations Energy Summit, a victory speech in hand. The audience was packed with global leaders, activists, and industry experts. As he took the stage, the applause was deafening. Today, Ben began, his voice steady, we stand at the precipice of a new world. A world where energy is no longer a tool of control. A world where every person has the power to shape their own future, free from the influence of corporations that would use us all for their gain. This is the dawn of the people-powered energy revolution. And together, we will ensure that it's a future where no one is left behind. The world had changed. Fortis was no longer the behemoth it once was. The legal battles, the protests, the relentless pushback, they had all led to one singular moment. Decentralized energy was no longer a dream, but a reality. The Energizer had broken free from the clutches of corporate giants and monopolies, and now it was in the hands of the people. Ben stood on the balcony of his office, overlooking the skyline of a city that had once been overshadowed by corporate greed. But now, thanks to the Energizer, rooftops were dotted with solar panels and small wind turbines, a testament to the shift that had taken place. The future was bright, both literally and figuratively. Claire joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. It's hard to believe it's finally happening, isn't it? Ben took the cup, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. I never thought it would be easy, but I didn't expect it to be this hard. So many moments where I thought we'd lose, but we didn't. And now we're changing the world. The fall of Fortis was just the beginning. While the corporation's grip on the global energy market had been shattered, it wasn't as simple as just replacing them with a new company. The world had seen too many years of corporate deceit, government corruption, and environmental destruction. What followed was a global movement to ensure that such a monopoly could never rise again. Governments scrambled to adapt. Laws were rewritten, regulations were passed, and new frameworks for energy ownership and distribution were established. For the first time in history, citizens had a say in how their energy was produced and consumed. Fortis's collapse left a gaping hole, but it also created a massive opportunity for new players in the energy market: independent developers, local cooperatives, and tech innovators. Ben and Claire were at the heart of this transformation, but they knew it wasn't going to be easy. The Energizer had unlocked the potential for a cleaner, more sustainable world, but it needed to be managed wisely. There were still skeptics, still opponents, and in many places, infrastructure was outdated and resistance was fierce. But as Energizer units continued to be deployed globally, the impact was undeniable. People who had never before had access to reliable electricity now had the power to generate it themselves. Entire villages in Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America were now connected to the global grid in a way that allowed them to be independent, without relying on traditional fossil fuels or corrupt energy giants. Ben's company, EnergizeX, had transformed from a small startup to an industry leader, but they weren't alone. Small companies, activist groups, and research institutions were all working together to ensure that Energizer technology was widely adopted. It was no longer just about selling units. It was about creating a movement. Ben smiled as he walked through the crowded headquarters of EnergizeX, watching his team of engineers, marketers, and customer support staff working tirelessly. They had come a long way, but there was still so much to do. Ben, we need to talk, Claire said, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. Ben looked at her, sensing the seriousness in her tone. What's up? We've received a message. It's from someone who wants to speak with you. Someone important, Claire said, her eyes narrowing slightly. Ben felt a chill run through him. After everything they'd been through, the last thing he expected was an unexpected meeting with a stranger. Who is it? Claire hesitated before answering. Someone who claims they were a part of Fortis's inner circle, and they have information that could change everything. Ben was no stranger to people trying to leverage information for their own gain. He had dealt with enough whistleblowers and opportunists to last a lifetime. But something about the message Claire had shown him felt different. This wasn't just a plea for money or attention. It felt more urgent, more personal. I don't trust this, Ben said, running a hand through his hair. But we can't ignore it, can we? No, Claire replied. We need to hear them out. But we need to be careful. They arranged to meet in a quiet, secure location. No cameras, no reporters. Just a small, nondescript room in the heart of the city. As they walked into the room, they were greeted by a man in his late 40s, wearing a dark suit and sunglasses, despite the dim lighting. He was tall, with an aura of authority that didn't match his appearance as a typical corporate informant. I'm Jacob Sterling, the man said, his voice low and measured. And I'm here to offer you a warning. Ben raised an eyebrow. A warning? Fortis isn't finished. They've been playing the long game. They have their sights on something bigger than just energy, Jacob said, sliding a folder across the table. You've exposed their plans for the energy sector, yes? But now, they're coming after your technology. And this time, they're not going to do it through the courts or the media. Jacob's eyes locked with Ben's. They're going after the Energizer itself. Ben opened the folder. Inside was a series of diagrams and blueprints, sophisticated designs that Ben had never seen before. They weren't just improvements on the Energizer. They were a complete overhaul, designed to make it obsolete. This is Project Helix, Jacob continued. It's a new kind of technology, one that could outpace everything you've developed. Fortis has been working on this in secret, and it's almost ready for deployment. If they succeed, it will render your Energizer obsolete, and you'll lose the battle you've worked so hard to win. Ben felt a surge of anger, but masked it with a calm exterior. How do you know all this? Jacob looked away for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. I used to work for Fortis. I was one of their top engineers. When I saw what they were really planning, when I realized what they were willing to do to stay on top, I couldn't be a part of it anymore. I left. But they're coming after everything now. They'll do whatever it takes to silence anyone who stands in their way. Ben and Claire exchanged a glance. The Energizer had been their greatest victory, and now it seemed that the battle was far from over. Fortis wasn't just going to lay down and die. They were going to fight to the bitter end. But Ben wasn't one to back down. He had taken on Fortis once and won. He could do it again. Ben leaned forward, his resolve hardening. If they're coming for the Energizer, we need to go on the offensive. We need to find Project Helix before they can use it against us. Claire nodded. But we can't do it alone. We'll need help from the global network we've built. Activists, researchers, engineers. We'll need them all. Jacob's eyes were sharp. I'll help you. But this is bigger than anything you've faced before. You're not just up against a corporation anymore. You're up against Fortis's last chance to maintain control of the global energy market. Ben stood up, his eyes burning with determination. Then we'll make sure they fail. As the team prepared for the next phase, Ben knew that this would be their greatest challenge yet. Fortis had never been more dangerous, and the stakes were higher than ever before. But Ben wasn't backing down. Not this time, not ever. The future was on the line, and they would fight for it with everything they had. Ben paced the floor of their temporary command center, his mind racing. The plans laid before him were bold, audacious even, but it wasn't enough to secure victory. Project Helix was real, and it was far more advanced than anything they had anticipated. The stakes had escalated from a battle for energy independence to a high-stakes war over the future of technology itself. Claire, Kofi, and Jacob were gathered around a large table, their faces grim. The walls were plastered with digital screens showing real-time data and news coverage. Activists were still rallying. Local governments were beginning to implement new energy policies. But it wasn't enough. Fortis had a new weapon, and this time, it wasn't just about taking down a corporation. It was about survival. "We have to find Helix before they deploy it," Ben said, his voice cutting through the silence. "If they're using it to disable Energizer tech, it'll set us back decades." Kofi shook his head, tapping the tablet in front of him. "It's more than just disabling the tech. If they have access to Helix, they'll control the energy grid itself. They could shut down the entire global network with a single command. If that happens, we're finished." Ben felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. It was hard to wrap his mind around the magnitude of what was at stake. Fortis had always been about money and power, but now they were playing with something far more dangerous: control. "Where are they hiding it?" Ben asked, turning to Jacob. "You said you had intel. What's the next step?" Jacob exhaled, a troubled look in his eyes. "It's not that simple. Fortis has been compartmentalizing Helix. They've spread out the components across multiple sites, some of which are off the grid. The only way we can trace it is by finding their primary research facility." "Do we have any idea where that is?" Claire asked, a hint of skepticism in her voice. "We've already taken down their public face. They're not going to just hand us a location." Jacob hesitated, then pulled out a small, encrypted device from his bag. He slid it across the table. "I've been digging through their communications. This came from an intercepted data stream. It's a list of locations, but there's one name that keeps popping up. Project Helix is being developed in a remote research facility in Iceland. I can't guarantee it's the only one, but it's the most likely place where they're assembling the final pieces." Ben's pulse quickened. Iceland. Cold, isolated, nearly impenetrable. It was the perfect place for Fortis to operate in secrecy. But now that they had a lead, there was no time to waste. "We're going to Iceland," Ben said, his voice decisive. "We get in, we get the intel, and we shut Helix down before it's too late." Within hours, Ben, Claire, Kofi, and Jacob were en route to Iceland. Their flight was quick, but their minds were occupied with the enormity of what they were about to face. They weren't just trying to steal a prototype or sabotage a facility. They were racing against time to stop Fortis from launching a technology that could reshape the world order. The small jet touched down in a remote airfield near Reykjavik. The air was crisp and biting, a reminder that they were about to face not just the threat of a corporation bent on world domination, but the harshest elements nature could throw at them. Kofi looked out the window as they descended, his voice tinged with disbelief. "This is like stepping into a dystopian movie. No one's going to find us out here." Ben stood up, shaking off his unease. "That's the point. We're the only ones who can stop them, and it won't be easy." They gathered their gear, advanced hacking tools, weapons, and surveillance equipment. Everything they needed to infiltrate the Fortis facility and extract the information they needed. As they made their way to their rendezvous point, a dilapidated farmhouse on the outskirts of Reykjavik, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was more than just a final showdown. They were walking into the belly of the beast, and there was no guarantee they would make it out alive. The facility itself was buried beneath the snow-covered mountains, a sprawling complex hidden deep within the icy terrain. The only way to access it was through a series of tunnels that extended miles underground. It was heavily guarded, with sensors monitoring every movement. Jacob had been invaluable, using his inside knowledge to guide them past the perimeter defenses. They infiltrated the facility under the cover of darkness, moving quickly and quietly through the long, cold corridors. "We're close," Jacob whispered as they approached a massive reinforced door, its surface covered in a series of high-tech security panels. "Any way to get through?" Claire asked, her voice low but tense. Jacob nodded. "This is where I come in." He worked quickly, his fingers flying over the security panel. In moments, the door clicked open. As it slid back, they found themselves in a large underground lab, the air thick with the hum of advanced machinery. Rows upon rows of monitors flashed with data, showing live readings of the Energizer systems they had been working so hard to protect. But what caught their attention was the massive terminal at the center of the room, a computer system linked directly to the Helix project. "There it is," Ben muttered under his breath. The central hub was in front of them, but they weren't alone. A group of Fortis security guards entered the room from a side passage. They had been spotted. Go! Ben shouted. Without thinking, Claire sprang into action, pulling out a small device that emitted a high-frequency pulse, temporarily disabling the security cameras. Kofi and Jacob took cover behind equipment, while Ben grabbed the nearest console, his hands flying over the keys. They'll be here in minutes, Kofi warned. We need to get the data now, Ben shouted back. He quickly accessed the terminal, decrypting the files that would expose the true capabilities of Helix. His heart raced as the data began downloading. The truth about Helix was more terrifying than he could have imagined. It wasn't just a way to take down the Energizer. It was a system designed to give Fortis total control over energy production worldwide. They could manipulate markets, shut off power to entire regions, and even target critical infrastructure. This is it, Ben said, looking at Claire, his eyes wide. This is what they've been planning. The final download was nearly complete when the sound of boots echoed down the hallway. The Fortis guards were closing in. Claire turned to Ben, her expression resolute. We have to move now. Ben nodded. They couldn't afford to stay. They had what they needed. The fight wasn't over, but they had just gained a significant advantage. The team ran down the corridors, dodging guards and using every ounce of their training to outmaneuver the enemy. They reached the extraction point, a small, hidden landing pad where a helicopter awaited. But as they neared the helicopter, a familiar voice echoed through the speakers. You're not leaving here with that data, Ben. It was David Greer, the former Fortis executive, now leading the company's final push to crush the Energizer movement. We'll see about that, Ben replied, steeling himself for the final confrontation. The helicopter's rotor blades whirred violently as Ben and the team made a mad dash toward the waiting aircraft. But David Greer's voice, cold and deliberate, sliced through the night air like a blade. He was in pursuit, and it was clear he would stop at nothing to retrieve the data Ben had stolen from Fortis. Ben's pulse quickened, but he didn't slow down. There was no turning back now. This was it, the final confrontation that would decide the fate of the Energizer and the future of global energy. Claire sprinted ahead, eyes scanning the surrounding area. Get to the chopper now, she shouted, her voice full of urgency. Behind them, the faint sound of footsteps drew closer, followed by the unmistakable click of guns being cocked. Greer's men were closing in. Fortis had deep pockets and deep resources. If they wanted something, they would take it, no matter the cost. Jacob led the charge, taking up a position by the helicopter's rear door. Come on, we don't have much time, he yelled, gesturing for them to hurry. Ben and Kofi reached the helicopter first, quickly securing their seats. Claire followed, her eyes darting toward the forest behind them, where Greer's team was advancing. She slammed the door shut just as a shot rang out, narrowly missing the tail rotor. Go! Go! Ben shouted at the pilot, his voice tight with desperation. The helicopter leapt into the air, the sudden lift carrying them away from the Fortis facility and toward the safety of the night sky. Ben glanced out the window as the facility grew smaller in the distance, but his mind was still racing. He had the data, but the real battle was only just beginning. As the helicopter flew into the cold, open sky, a heavy silence settled over the team. They were out of immediate danger, but Greer was still on their tail, and Fortis wasn't going to stop until they got back what they had lost. The data Ben had stolen was crucial. Helix was more than just an advanced energy technology. It was a weapon capable of controlling every aspect of the world's energy flow. And if Fortis had control of it, they could not only destroy Energizer, they could destroy the very foundation of renewable energy itself. We need to go public with this, Ben said, breaking the silence as they climbed higher into the night sky. The world needs to know what Fortis is planning. We can't just keep this information to ourselves. Claire nodded in agreement. But we also need to protect it. Greer will stop at nothing to get that data back. We need to make sure it's safe. I'll secure a safe house, Jacob said. We'll upload the data to a server no one can trace. But we need to move fast. Ben looked at Claire, then Kofi. We need to be ready for anything. Greer isn't going to let us walk away from this, and if he gets his hands on Helix, it could be game over for all of us. Kofi glanced out the window, his brow furrowed. We need to play this smart. Fortis won't make a move until they have a way to neutralize us. That means they're going to go after our weaknesses, our connections. We need to protect the people who've helped us along the way. Right? Ben agreed. We'll make sure our team is safe, and then we take Fortis down for good. As they made their way toward the safe house, the world below them seemed peaceful, tranquil even. But Ben knew better. Fortis was a corporation built on secrecy, manipulation, and power. If they wanted to control the world, they would stop at nothing. The next phase of their plan wasn't just to neutralize the Energizer technology, it was to silence anyone who stood in their way. Just as they approached the landing site, a sudden shiver ran through Ben. A feeling of dread gnawed at his gut. "Hold on," Ben said, his voice low. "Something's not right." Claire looked at him, concern in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I don't know, but I feel like we're being watched." As if on cue, a flash of light lit up the sky, a flare, and a deafening explosion shook the helicopter, sending them spiraling toward the ground. Ben's world went black. When he regained consciousness, it was to the sound of sirens and the taste of blood in his mouth. The helicopter had crash-landed in a small clearing, far from the original landing site. The noise from the explosion had sent them off course, and they were lucky to be alive. Ben blinked, groggy but alert. The first thing he saw was Claire, standing over him, her expression tense. "Ben," she said, urgency in her voice. "Are you okay?" He groaned, trying to sit up. His body felt heavy, bruised. "What happened? Where are we?" Claire helped him to his feet. "We were ambushed. Greer's men got to us first. They've been tracking us ever since we left the Fortis facility. We need to move now." Ben's mind raced as the adrenaline surged through him. They had to get out of there before Greer caught up with them. The Energizer's future, and the future of renewable energy itself, was hanging in the balance. "Where's Kofi?" Ben asked, his heart skipping a beat. Claire's face darkened. "He's gone. They took him." Ben's chest tightened with a mix of grief and rage. Kofi had been more than just a teammate. He was a friend, someone who had believed in the mission from the very beginning. And now, he was at the mercy of Fortis. "We have to save him," Ben said, his voice steady despite the pounding in his head. "We get Kofi back, and we stop Greer. Once and for all." The next few hours were a blur of strategy and action. Using the data they had downloaded from the Fortis facility, they managed to pinpoint the location of Kofi and Greer. But they weren't the only ones looking for answers. Fortis had launched a full-scale offensive to reclaim Helix and wipe out anyone who dared to challenge them. The world had no idea what was coming. Ben and Claire fought side by side, breaking into Fortis's final stronghold, a heavily fortified base hidden beneath a mountain range in the Swiss Alps. The final battle was fast and brutal, but in the end, they triumphed. In the heart of the base, Ben found Kofi, alive but battered, tied to a chair in a dark, cold room. The look in his eyes was enough to fuel Ben's rage. "Get him out of here," Ben ordered Claire, as he stormed toward the control room. There, he confronted Greer. "You should have stayed out of my way, Ben," Greer sneered, his cold eyes never leaving Ben's. "You've lost. Helix is unstoppable. The future is mine." Ben stood tall, his jaw clenched in determination. "Not anymore. You're done, Greer." With a few well-placed keystrokes, Ben shut down Helix for good. The screen went black, and the lights flickered out. Fortis had lost its ultimate weapon, and its control over the global energy market crumbled in an instant. The world would never be the same. The Energizer had not just survived, it had thrived. With Fortis defeated, a new era of decentralized, sustainable energy had dawned. The data Ben had risked everything to obtain had exposed the truth behind Helix, and the global community rallied around the cause of clean, equitable energy. As Ben and his team stood outside the ruins of Fortis's final stronghold, they felt the weight of their victory. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. But for the first time in a long while, they could finally see a future free from the shadow of corporate greed. "This is just the beginning," Ben said, looking out at the horizon. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but we've won the first battle." And with that, they walked into the future, together. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?